10 years ago, Earth faced an unprecedented catastrophe. A massive swarm of extraterrestrial lifeforms, known as EVA, descended upon the planet, wiping out entire cities in moments. Humanity's most advanced weapons were powerless against the invasion, and for a fleeting time, it seemed as though the extinction of the human race was inevitable. However, in a twist of fate, the arrival of the EVA brought with it a cosmic substance called element, which spread throughout Earth's atmosphere. This mysterious energy triggered an evolutionary shift in the human population, awakening supernatural abilities in select individuals. Empowered by these new gifts, humanity launched a counteroffensive, shifting the tide of war and ushering in a new age of warfare led by superpowered individuals. In the present day, the world is vastly different. To combat the ongoing threat of EVA, elite military training institutions were established to raise a new generation of warriors. Among them, the 8th Special Forces Training School, commonly referred to as Hachi School, stands as the nation's most prestigious academy. It recruits exceptionally gifted youths, aged 15 and above, who have awakened strong alpha abilities. These students are trained rigorously to become humanity's ultimate defenders. At the base of the school's grand tower stands the protagonist of this story, Kuroboshi Gui. He gazes up at the imposing structure, with a complex mix of determination and quiet resignation. Though he technically belongs to this institution, his role is far from honorable. He serves as a janitor, the only person at Hachi School without an alpha ability. While lost in thought, he is struck on the head by an empty can. Looking up, he sees a sneering student, a known bully, mocking him. The student, an alpha-ranked trainee, orders him to dispose of the trash and ridicules his powerless status. Kuroboshi suppresses his frustration and complies silently, a common routine for him in a world where people are valued by their abilities. In this society, individuals are ranked based on the strength of their alpha powers. The lowest ranks, E and F, are designated for civilians with minimal or no combat use, while ranks A through D are reserved for trained fighters. At the pinnacle stand the S-rank individuals, legends whose power can shape the battlefield. Kuroboshi, however, is an anomaly only known unranked person in the system, having never awakened any alpha ability at all. As he bends to pick up the can, he mutters defiantly, rejecting the idea that power alone determines one's worth. His quiet rebellion irritates the bully, who responds with violence. He beats Kuroboshi savagely, seizing him by the hair and conjuring a fireball to threaten him. Just as he prepares to strike, the fire in his hand suddenly freezes into solid ice. Bewildered, the bully looks at his hand, confused by the sudden change. A stern voice interrupts. Hyuga Orin, a first-year student at Hachi School and an elite S-rank warrior, steps forward. Known as the Ice Wall Witch, her presence alone is enough to halt the bully in his tracks. She scolds him for using an alpha ability against a powerless civilian. Though annoyed, the bully obeys and slinks away. Orin then turns to Kuroboshi. Picking up the can, she coldly warns him not to challenge those of higher rank, reminding him that, in emergencies, higher-ranked individuals are even allowed to eliminate lower-ranked ones. Her tone reflects the widespread belief that rank equals value, but Kuroboshi simply smiles, thanking her for the help and boldly proclaiming that rank and abilities are meaningless. What truly matters is action. As the school's janitor, he supports the students so they can train to protect the world. His quiet but firm conviction catches Orin off guard, and she watches him leave, murmuring to herself about how strange he is. A flashback follows. 8 years ago, Kuroboshi, then a tearful young boy, sat with his mother. He had been cruelly mocked for lacking an alpha ability, but his mother reassured him, reminding him that one's value was not measured by power, but by purpose and contribution. She encouraged him to find his own way to be helpful, to find meaning beyond strength. Inspired, he promised to try his best. Yet tragedy soon followed. His mother fell gravely ill. Doctors explained that her body couldn't handle her alpha power, an irony that her unranked son never forgot. There was no cure, and as she lay in the hospital, Whispers of judgment filled the air. A nurse cruelly muttered that the mother and child were worthless, unranked individuals who contributed nothing to society. The words stayed with him, becoming a source of deep pain and motivation. Now, back in the present, Kuroboshi continues his work as a janitor at Hachi School. With meticulous care, he scrubs toilets, polishes windows, and mops floors. His dedication is unwavering, rooted in the belief that supporting others is a noble role in itself. Having completed his duties ahead of schedule, he prepares to continue his work elsewhere. Meanwhile, at the training grounds, a combat exercise is underway. The instructor assigns each student a C-Class EVA, intending to test their real-world battle skills. The trainees, all ranked B or higher, ready themselves as the cages open, and monstrous, four-legged creatures charge forward. Among the fighters, two figures stand out: the arrogant bully and the ice-wielding Orin. The bully unleashes a devastating fire attack, while Orin raises an impenetrable wall of ice. Their synchronized strikes obliterate the EVAs instantly, leaving the other students awestruck by their overwhelming power. Though the battle concludes quickly, the contrast remains sharp. The students with abilities are celebrated as heroes, while the unranked janitor remains unseen, quietly doing his part. Yet within that quiet strength lies the heart of a different kind of hero, one who, despite being overlooked and underestimated, carries a resolve that no rank can measure. While others were absorbed in displays of power, Kuroboshi quietly continued his humble task, picking up a discarded can. Just as he was about to leave, a blinding beam of light tore through the sky. Moments later, the ground quaked violently as the beam struck the city, unleashing a massive shockwave. Buildings collapsed, roads split apart, and chaos ensued. Alarms rang out, and Hachi School's communication system blared a warning that an AVA attack had been detected in District D-48, just outside the school. Students barely had time to process the announcement before a monstrous figure emerged. Unlike any previously encountered AVA, this was something far more terrifying: a colossal dragon covered in black scales, adorned with glowing blue patterns. Its overwhelming aura of dominance made it clear it was no ordinary threat. The city's defense system immediately called for all C-rank and higher warriors to engage the beast. Amid the chaos, Kuroboshi, stunned by the creature's size and power, Orin stood firm, shouting to rally those around her. They were the strongest. If they abandoned the field, who would protect the civilians? But her voice was swallowed by panic. One warrior collapsed to his knees, trembling and tearful, only to be ripped apart mid-air as the dragon devoured him without pause. The display shattered any remaining courage. Orin froze. This was no mindless beast. The dragon hunted with intention, fed with purpose, and relished the fear it inspired. She had studied such creatures, AVAs that possessed intelligence and malice, but no lesson could prepare her for this reality. The creature turned its glowing gaze toward her. A deep growl resonated from its chest, and from its maw emerged a grotesque, writhing appendage. It surged toward her like a serpent of death. Paralyzed, she could only await the inevitable. Then someone moved. A figure dashed across the battlefield. Kuroboshi, the janitor, armed with only a sack of dried leaves. He hurled its contents into the dragon's face, creating a cloud of debris that threw off its aim. Seizing the moment, he lifted Orin onto his back and ran with desperate speed. Spotting a manhole, he pried it open and guided her toward the darkness below, a place he knew well from years of janitorial work. Lowering her in, he followed. Just as the dragon's appendage struck the ground they had vacated. The sewers were foul and damp, but they were safe. As they moved through the tunnel, Orin questioned why he had risked his life. He simply said he did what he could. No rank or title was needed to help others. His words lingered. In a world obsessed with power, his quiet bravery shone brighter than any combat record. Her cheeks warmed as she whispered a thank you, knowing she owed her life to him. Eventually, they reached an underground shelter, guarded by a massive steel door. Relief washed over them, but it was short-lived. The doors began to close. Kuroboshi shouted for them to wait, still carrying Orin. Voices inside responded. The shelter was full. There was no space left. Then came the murmurs. Someone had recognized her. She was Hyuga, an elite S-Rank student. The mood shifted. Cries demanded her admission. Kuroboshi stepped forward, but a hand shoved him back. A student sneered, pointing out his status as a janitor. There was no room for the powerless. He did not belong. Kuroboshi said nothing. He had risked everything, and now stood cast aside. Orin objected, insisting he be let in. He had saved her. Her words met silence. The crowd remained unmoved. As fury and guilt surged within her, the ground trembled. The dragon had returned. The shelter vibrated with each approaching step. Panic rose anew. In that instant, Kuroboshi pushed Orin inside. The doors slammed shut behind her. He remained outside. Alone now, he turned toward the battlefield. There was no hesitation in his stance. He gripped a rusted iron rod, the only weapon he had, and faced the dragon. With every ounce of strength, he attacked. His blows clanged uselessly against its scales, but still he fought, driven by conviction. Then came the end. The dragon struck with terrifying speed. Its jaws tore through him. Pain flared, then faded. As his body dissolved into dust, regret filled his final thoughts. He had always believed effort could overcome weakness. But as death claimed him, he admitted to himself the truth. He had longed for power, not for recognition, but to protect, especially in his mother's name. Just as his existence threatened to vanish, something stirred. An ethereal screen flared into being. A deep voice echoed in the void, announcing that the alpha ability activation condition had been met. Energy surged through him. A black vortex formed above the battlefield, drawing in air, light, and sound. The dragon, sensing true danger for the first time, struggled against the force. It was futile. Its body was torn apart, bit by bit. A system message confirmed the consumption process. As the rate reached 100%, the dragon screamed, and then was gone. Silence followed. The vortex collapsed into a black crystal, shimmering with power. It vibrated, cracked, and exploded. From the swirling dust, a figure emerged. Kuroboshi stood reborn. His senses were heightened, his veins alive with power. He had been devoured by the strongest of monsters and emerged stronger. Hunger gnawed at him. The system reactivated, its voice cold and clear. It confirmed successful consumption. The alpha ability of the strongest species was now his. Activation awaited his answer. The moment he acknowledged his hunger, weakness overtook him. He collapsed, and a strange sensation coursed through him. In his palm, a miniature black hole formed. It wasn't as large as the previous one, but it possessed the same gravitational force. The broken remains of the earlier crystal began to shift, and were drawn into the miniature vortex until nothing remained. Alone and breathless, he heard a voice. It began as a whisper, but soon became a roar, echoing with fury, pain, and desperation. It demanded something, the return of a body. And then, impossibly, he saw the dragon again, towering and furious. Its eyes burned with rage as it accused him of theft. The dragon lunged. He braced himself for death once more, but awoke with a jolt. Gasping for breath, he found himself in a hospital. The sterile walls, the machines, the cold light, all confirmed reality. The nightmare had felt real. Too real. He'd been devoured, destroyed. How could he still be alive? Then he saw it, a strange dark mark on his palm. It wasn't a scar, nor a wound. It was something alien. As he stared, the mark pulsed, and something emerged, a tiny creature floating before him. It had tiny horns, delicate wings, and a faint glow. Despite its small form, it radiated arrogance. With a high-pitched voice, it made an absurd demand that it wanted its body back. Shocked, Kuroboshi struggled to make sense of it. Was this the dragon? The terrifying, godlike beast that had consumed him? This small, ridiculous creature? The being, clearly insulted, puffed up and declared itself ruler of all extraterrestrial life. It claimed to be the strongest species. When Kuroboshi laughed in disbelief, it pointed to the patterns on its horns as proof. They did match the markings of the dragon he had fought, but it still seemed too ridiculous to believe. Desperate to prove its identity, the creature tried to reveal its true name, a name known only to the highest beings in the universe. But then, it paused, confused. It couldn't remember. Frustrated, Kuroboshi punched the creature, sending it flying. He seized it, shaking it angrily. How could something so small have caused so much destruction? Did it not realize how many people it had killed? His classmates, his friends, so many lives gone. In a strained voice, the creature confessed the truth that the predator had become the prey. When it had consumed him, something had gone wrong. Instead of digesting him, its own body had been pulled in. Now, his new form was composed of the dragon's very essence. Kuroboshi froze. The creature, the once feared apex predator, was now merely a fragment of what it used to be, and his existence was now tied to it. Before he could ask more questions, he sensed someone approaching. Panic surged. He urged the dragon to hide. But it was too late. The door burst open. A familiar figure entered. Orin, a high-ranking warrior known for her cold demeanor and formidable strength. Her sharp eyes widened in disbelief as she saw him sitting up. Relief and joy swept over her face as she rushed to his side. She had been told he was comatose. After a week, he had finally awakened. He recognized her from high school and greeted her with casual familiarity, calling her Orin. She frowned slightly at his informal tone, surprised by his attitude. Still, there were more pressing matters to discuss. The atmosphere between Kuroboshi and Orin quickly turned tense. As a high-ranking officer, she scolded him for disobeying orders during the previous battle. Her role was to protect civilians, and he had acted on his own, compromising their safety. Though he admitted guilt, he claimed his actions were not intentional. He had simply followed his instincts. Their confrontation was interrupted when the air suddenly turned icy cold. The source was Orin herself. She activated her power, her expression now cold and resolute, as she began questioning him. A week ago, the strongest species had vanished without a trace, and he was the only known survivor. How he had managed to live through such an impossible event was now a matter of global concern. Orin reminded him that it was his responsibility to humanity to tell the truth. Confused, he was stunned to hear that he had been unconscious for a whole week, recovering in a special forces hospital. To bring him up to speed, Orin turned on the television. News broadcasts displayed a world in chaos, still trying to unravel the mystery. Surveillance and communication had been disabled during the event, leaving no concrete evidence of what happened. Still, one mysterious clue emerged. A lone boy had been seen at the epicenter. His heart raced. Could that boy have been him? Orin confirmed it. She was there to learn the truth, and if necessary, take action. He hesitated. His memory was fragmented. But just as he began to form a response, a voice echoed in his mind. The small dragon. It warned him not to speak the truth. If people found out that he had absorbed the strongest species, and that his body was now made from it, they would see him as a threat. They would hunt him down. Clutching his head in pain, he masked his distress as a headache. The dragon smirked inwardly, content that he understood the risk. Yet despite the dragon's warnings, Kuroboshi made up his mind. Holding the small dragon like a plush toy, he chose to be honest. He told Orin everything. That he had used his alpha ability to devour the strongest species. He revealed a strange mark in his palm as proof. The dragon panicked, calling him a fool. But Orin just stared, confused. There was no mark. Nothing in his palm. Just an ordinary boy claiming something unbelievable. If he wouldn't take the matter seriously, she would. An ice crystal formed in her hand, cold air swirling violently. This was a matter of life and death. She was prepared to act. Suddenly, Something shifted in the atmosphere. The small dragon tensed on his shoulder. Something dangerous was coming. A shadow loomed above the rooftop, and in a heartbeat, the ceiling shattered. A monstrous figure descended into the room. Orin gasped. The creature was pulsing with dark, unnatural energy. It wasn't a known enemy. It was an Eva, an alien life form far more dangerous than any S-rank threat. Acting fast, Orin summoned her most powerful defensive technique, Absolute Ice Wall. It was a shimmering fortress of frozen energy, capable of withstanding even the most devastating attacks. But even as the wall solidified, the dragon warned Kuroboshi. This Eva wasn't here by accident. It had followed the dragon's scent. These beings had fought the dragon before. Now, sensing it was weakened and fused with a human, they had returned to finish the job. The Eva wanted him. Outside, the wind howled as the Eva slammed against the ice wall. Tremors rocked the building. Cracks spread across the barrier. Then it shattered. Instinctively, Kuroboshi threw himself forward, shoving Orin out of the way. He shouted for her to escape. It was after him, not her. But Orin refused to run. Her eyes burned with unwavering resolve. She was a soldier, sworn to protect others. She wouldn't abandon her duty. With a roar, she unleashed her next attack. Thousands of sharp ice pillars burst from the ground, piercing the Eva's form. The sheer force filled the room with shards of frost and frozen light. For a moment, silence. Then the Eva moved, completely unfazed. The ice had vanished, erased without a trace. Orin's heart sank. Her strongest attack had failed. She ordered Kuroboshi to stay behind her, shielding him once again. Meanwhile, the dragon urged him to flee. This was their chance. They couldn't fight something this strong. But he didn't listen. Instead, he charged at the creature's leg, hoping to knock it off balance. Orin screamed for him to stop. He had no special powers. This was suicide. But he smiled. He knew he was weak. Still, if the Eva was after him, then he had to take responsibility. He'd be its opponent. The gamble worked. The creature's glowing eyes locked on him, turning its attention away from Orin. He spotted an opening, a broken hospital window. If he could jump through it and land in a tree, he might escape into the forest. The dragon scolded him. What if he missed? That was its body too. If he died, they both died. But he jumped. As he leaped, something unexpected happened. He soared far higher than a human should. The dragon's power had activated. For a brief moment, he felt the freedom of flight. But soon, panic returned. He couldn't control his descent. If he hit the ground, it would kill him. The dragon, dropping its snarky tone, instructed him to focus. Don't panic. Channel energy into his legs. Trust the power. He crashed into the ground, sending dust and debris flying. A crater formed beneath him, yet he was unhurt, not even a scratch. He looked at his hands, stunned. The dragon grumbled, explaining it had lent him its strength. Without that, he'd be dead. Before he could recover, the Eva took flight and began its pursuit. Its massive wings sent shockwaves through the air. He ran, but it was closing in fast. He couldn't outrun it. Then the dragon proposed a deal. Surrender control of his body, and it would eliminate the threat. Refuse, and everything. Orin, the hospital, everyone would be destroyed. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. Kuroboshi was torn. The dragon explained that the body was originally its own. It had been sealed inside him, trapped. But the recent surge of energy confirmed that its powers were still active. The jump proved it. Yet there was no time to debate. The monstrous Eva was relentless. Its presence darkened the sky. Its shrieks shook the earth. Every time he dodged, the ground shattered beneath him. The dragon, increasingly impatient, pushed again. Surrender. Let it handle the threat. Still, Kuroboshi hesitated. He feared the dragon's intentions. Could he trust it? Would it stop after defeating the Eva? Or would it take control permanently? The dragon's voice pierced the chaos, demanding a decision. If Kuroboshi didn't act soon, he would die. Yet, even as he ran from the monstrous bird's attacks, his resolve remained firm. Handing over his body to the dragon, the strongest species, was unthinkable. He hadn't forgotten what it had done at Hachi School. The destruction it caused was burned into his memory. But before he could reflect further, disaster struck. A blast of searing energy erupted from the monster's mouth. The air shimmered with heat as the attack rushed toward him. He dodged just in time, the explosion sending shockwaves across the battlefield. His heart pounded. That had been too close. The monstrous bird was merciless. Then, a scream broke through the air. His eyes darted toward its source, a woman in a wheelchair, left behind in the chaos. She was completely exposed. Panic surged through him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. If she got caught in the crossfire, she wouldn't make it. The creature sensed weakness and shifted its attention toward her. Kuroboshi cursed and shouted, trying to pull its focus back. He didn't know if it would work, but he had to try. The small dragon on his shoulder berated him. This was reckless. He could have just surrendered his body and let it take care of everything, but he refused. If his body truly held the DNA of the strongest species, then he must have the strength to fight back. With clenched fists, he charged at the monster and punched it with everything he had. Nothing happened. The bird didn't even flinch. It was like hitting a mountain. The dragon sighed sharply, reminding him that without its will, Kuroboshi was still just a regular human. Strength meant nothing without direction. Then, the bird began to gather energy again. Its second atomic breath glowed with blinding radiance. Kuroboshi knew he couldn't dodge this time. The dragon's voice became deadly serious. This was his final chance. If he didn't hand over control, everyone, him, the woman, the hospital staff, would be wiped out. The dragon shouted at him to decide. Time was up. Instead of giving in, Kuroboshi grabbed the dragon tightly and mocked it. This entire crisis was its fault. It drew the monster here, caused the chaos, and now wanted control for its own benefit. No, he wouldn't surrender. If he was going to use the dragon's power, he would do it his way. As the bird's attack reached its peak and surged toward them, the dragon screamed in disbelief. Kuroboshi had lost his mind. This was suicide. But still, he stood his ground, a smirk forming on his face. He'd pushed himself to the limit, and he wasn't backing down now. Panic surged through the dragon. It had no intention of dying alongside a fool. With no time left, it reluctantly gave in. It ordered him to extend his right hand. Just once, it would lend him power, but only a fraction. Without hesitation, the dragon dove into the dark void in his palm. The moment it vanished, a rush of raw, untamed energy surged through him. It began at his core and spread through his body like fire. For the first time, he felt true power. With newfound strength and resolve, he faced the sky and prepared to counter the attack. The system responded instantly, displaying a warning. Controlled release of power from the strongest species, 0.00001%. Even that minuscule amount was overwhelming. He clenched his fist, and a blinding blue atomic blast erupted from it with devastating force. The collision was instant. Two incomprehensible forces met head-on. The explosion shattered the night sky. His energy, now laced with the dragon's power, overpowered the monster's attack and surged forward. The blast struck the bird, obliterating it completely. Its massive body was incinerated and reduced to ashes by a single devastating strike. Stunned silence followed. The battlefield, moments ago filled with chaos, now stood quiet. From a distance, the woman in the wheelchair had watched everything unfold. She smiled faintly, relief and awe in her eyes. The system, ever precise, registered the event and announced the termination of the limited power release. The overwhelming energy left his body, replaced by crushing exhaustion. Kuroboshi could hardly believe what had happened, but before he could reflect, his legs gave out, and he collapsed. Orin called out his name and rushed to him. As she reached his side, her gaze fell on the remains of the monster. Something wasn't right. She recognized it. That creature had appeared earlier. It was the extraterrestrial being known as Eva. But how? How had it been defeated so easily? Then the realization hit her like a thunderbolt. Kuroboshi wasn't supposed to have powers. He was meant to be ordinary. No alpha-level potential. And yet, what she had witnessed was proof that he was something else entirely. Something unprecedented. Later, dim light filled a quiet room. Kuroboshi sat alone, slowly regaining consciousness. A warm, soothing aroma filled the air. Tea. It was oddly comforting. As his vision adjusted, he saw an imposing man standing across from him, an older figure with a strong, commanding presence. The man wore a pristine uniform and carried a traditional Japanese katana at his side. Without a word, the man poured tea and offered Kuroboshi a cup, a surprisingly peaceful gesture considering the circumstances. The contrast between the man's intimidating aura and his calm hospitality was striking. Kuroboshi's thoughts raced. Who was this man, and where was he? Sensing his confusion, the man spoke with calm authority. He explained that Kuroboshi had been on the brink of death after the battle. He had been taken into their care and brought to a secure location. This place, the man said, was the Hachi School's underground training facility, a special shelter for VIPs during Eva attacks. It featured humanity's strongest defenses, built to withstand threats from both inside and out. Nishiki Ryogen introduced himself to Kuroboshi as an S-ranker, the commander of the 8th Special Forces and the principal of the 8th Special Forces Training School. Recognition instantly lit up in Kuroboshi's eyes. Nishiki was a legend, the man who had single-handedly defeated the strongest species that once devastated Tokyo 8 years ago. He was revered as Japan's most powerful special soldier, an undefeated warrior against the extraterrestrial threat known as the Ava. Nishiki then made a subtle but pointed comment, noting that as the school's janitor, Kuroboshi was technically under his command. The statement served as a quiet reprimand, reminding Kuroboshi of the chain of command and the respect it demanded. Meanwhile, the tiny dragon hiding in Kuroboshi's hand stirred uneasily. Upon seeing Nishiki, it was overcome with dread. The sheer presence of Nishiki left no doubt. This was not someone to trifle with. The mini-dragon knew it stood no chance against such a formidable force. As Kuroboshi attempted to process everything, a familiar voice drew his attention. Orin, approached with a warm smile, assuring him of his safety. The presence of someone familiar helped ground his rattled nerves. Then, another familiar figure arrived, a young woman in a wheelchair, Unagi Senri. Kuroboshi recognized her immediately as the girl he had helped during the Ava attack at the hospital. It was a relief to see her unharmed. Senri introduced herself formally this time, revealing she was an A-ranker. She thanked Kuroboshi for saving her life, making it clear that she was not a random bystander, but deeply involved in the organization behind the scenes. Her rank and presence only added to the mounting mystery of why Kuroboshi had been brought to this underground facility. Before he could inquire further, Nishiki took control of the conversation once again. However, he did so with surprising hospitality, offering Kuroboshi cookies he had baked himself. The juxtaposition of a hardened warrior making adorable, tasty cookies was baffling, but hunger won out, and Kuroboshi tried them. They were, surprisingly, delicious. The light-hearted moment ended abruptly when Nishiki shifted the topic to a grave matter. Kuroboshi had devoured the strongest species and now harbored its elemental power. The revelation hit Kuroboshi like a freight train. How could they know? He instinctively looked at Orin, suspecting she might have betrayed his secret. But Nishiki quickly clarified that Orin had said nothing. They had been monitoring Kuroboshi all along. The tension in the room rose as Nishiki elaborated on the nature of Element, the extraterrestrial energy source that Eva had brought from space. It was the foundation of alpha abilities among humans, though human technology couldn't detect it. Even the most elite fighters could barely sense its presence. But Senri was different. Her rare alpha ability allowed her to see and analyze element, making her an invaluable asset. Her meeting with Kuroboshi had been a test to confirm whether he truly possessed the ability to devour the strongest species. Then, Nishiki delved into the grim history of the strongest Eva, a solitary creature that had decimated Tokyo 8 years ago. It had been so destructive that its power was likened to that of a nuclear bomb. The recent attack had been mistakenly assumed to be the same creature, underlining the level of destruction such beings could cause. Without warning, Nishiki drew his katana and held it against Kuroboshi's throat. The room went dead silent. The cheerful tea-drinking host had instantly transformed into a deadly warrior. The message was clear. If Kuroboshi posed even the slightest risk, it was Nishiki's sworn duty to eliminate him. Kuroboshi's heart pounded. Just seconds ago, he had been sharing snacks. Now he was on the verge of being executed. Orin quickly stepped in, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. She argued that if Kuroboshi truly held the powers of the strongest species, more threats were sure to follow. In that case, he could become humanity's ultimate weapon. Her logic gave Nishiki pause. Trusting a teenager with world-ending powers was risky, but the potential benefits were undeniable. Nishiki lowered his blade, but made it clear that Kuroboshi needed to be kept under observation. The perfect person for that task? Senri, the ever-smiling ranker with a slightly unnerving enthusiasm. With unfiltered glee, she approached Kuroboshi and grabbed his hand. It wasn't a tender gesture. It was more clinical, almost predatory. She informed him that his element level had dropped to 0, comparing him to a spent battery. The mini-dragon inside him writhed in discomfort. Facing a monstrous bird had been one thing, but being prodded by Senri was a different kind of psychological torture. Then Senri removed her eye patch, revealing a glowing eye, a manifestation of her rare and powerful ability. She placed her forehead against Kuroboshi's, initiating a ritual-like observation called celestial observation. Her goal is to explore the cosmic mystery that was Kuroboshi's inner universe. In an instant, she was transported into a vast, cosmic realm inside his mind, a void illuminated by countless stars, each representing fragments of elemental energy. Despite the belief that Kuroboshi had no alpha ability, the presence of element proved otherwise. However, there was far less energy than what others possessed. She soon noticed something terrifying. The stars weren't merely floating, they were being consumed. The void itself was alive, pulling in every fragment like a black hole. Panic surged within Senri. Kuroboshi's ability wasn't ordinary. It was a consuming force, an abyss that devoured all. The pull intensified. She felt herself being dragged toward the center, her limbs heavy, her breath short. Her heart pounded as she realized she might be absorbed into the abyss. What had started as an evaluation was turning into a life-threatening ordeal. Senri struggled against a powerful, otherworldly force, the sensation akin to being dragged into a cosmic vacuum. The overwhelming pull seemed inescapable, but just as despair settled in, the force abruptly weakened. She stumbled back into consciousness, gasping for breath as the oppressive darkness loosened its grip. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. Something still stirred within the void. Her eyes locked onto a massive black sphere, hovering ominously in the distance. A chilling, unearthly energy radiated from it, causing shivers to crawl down her spine. But what truly made her uneasy was not just the sphere itself. It was the presence that emerged from the surrounding shadows. From the darkness, the most terrifying form imaginable began to appear. The strongest species, long believed to be defeated, a dragon of immense malice and power. Its golden eyes gleamed with ancient hatred, and its jagged teeth bared in hunger. Without hesitation, it lunged at Senri, jaws wide open, ready to devour her whole. In that split second, her instincts took over. She cried out, canceling her celestial observation. The world warped around her, snapping violently back to reality. Her body trembled as she gasped for air, sweat dripping down her face. the panic of what she had just witnessed still fresh. Orin, her companion, immediately rushed to her side, noticing Senri's shaking hands and ragged breathing. Meanwhile, Kuroboshi looked on, confused. He had barely felt anything during the observation, yet Senri's reaction indicated she had experienced something far more intense and terrifying. The principal, ever composed, calmly offered Senri a cup, suggesting it would help her calm down. However, Orin dryly noted it was only water, not tea, a detail that highlighted the absurdity of trying to soothe someone who had nearly been consumed by a metaphorical black hole. Senri, still visibly shaken, gripped the cup with trembling hands. The fear refused to leave her. Breaking the tension, the principal asked what she had seen. Taking a deep breath, Senri explained that Kuroboshi's alpha ability was indeed a black hole. It was so powerful, it devoured even his own elemental energy, hence his unusual readings. He was essentially consuming himself. More shocking was what resided inside his ability. The strongest species, believed to have been eradicated, was actually sealed within the black hole. It had not died, but had become imprisoned in Kuroboshi's core. The principal's expression darkened. Kuroboshi wasn't just a survivor, he was a living time bomb. If the entity within him ever escaped, it could mean catastrophic consequences. Housing a monstrous dragon inside one's soul was not a sustainable situation. Even ice cream couldn't fix that kind of stress. Senri described how the dragon had attacked her within the void, its ferocity confirming just how dangerous the species still was. Hearing this, the principal did not hesitate. In a flash, he drew his katana and pressed it against Kuroboshi's neck. Orin gasped, trying to reason with him, but the principal remained cold and calculated. If the strongest species could exert its will, even in a sealed state, there was a risk it could eventually break free. Eliminating Kuroboshi now, though grim, seemed the only logical choice to ensure the safety of humanity. As tension built, a miniature dragon, the spirit of the strongest species, suddenly spoke. Panicked, it pleaded with Kuroboshi to retaliate, offering him power in exchange for action. Senri quickly deduced that this tiny dragon was the soul of the one Kuroboshi had absorbed. The body was consumed by the black hole, but its essence remained, free and conscious. The principal, unmoved by the spirit's pleas, raised his katana and slashed. Blood sprayed as the blade struck Kuroboshi. He staggered, pain shooting through him, but the wound, though severe, was only the beginning. The miniature dragon exploded in rage, its primal fury shaking the room. Though small, its anger filled the space with dread. Then, something shifted. A radiant light erupted from Kuroboshi's body, glowing with a powerful blue aura. The energy pulsed like a living heartbeat, expanding and contracting with wild intensity. Senri's eyes widened in awe and fear. The elemental surge was beyond comprehension, exceeding even the S+ rank. It reached a level comparable to Eva or higher. The principal's voice cut through the tension, resolute and unflinching. There was no longer any question. Kuroboshi had to be eliminated. The blue aura radiating from him was not just power. It was a sign that the force within him could rival even the strongest known threat to humanity. Wind surged around Kuroboshi's body as his aura expanded, forming a protective shield. The principal narrowed his eyes. The situation had reached its worst-case scenario. Kuroboshi, now effectively identified as the strongest species, stood at the center of a swirling storm of raw, unstable energy. Senri, still recovering, noticed something alarming. The energy from the sealed dragon was increasing rapidly. If it reached a certain point, the dragon might fully escape. The principal, determined to act before that could happen, drew his katana again. He launched forward, moving with blinding speed. His blade clashed against the barrier of light surrounding Kuroboshi, creating powerful shock waves. Senri watched in awe as the principal unleashed his most advanced sword techniques, infused with the potent energy of star elements. Each strike was precise, sharp, and relentless. Yet the barrier held. The radiant blue aura absorbed every blow like an indestructible wall. The principal's attacks, while devastating, were unable to pierce it. It was like trying to slash through a thundercloud, futile and maddening. Then, the principal noticed something within the glow. A faint outline of a dragon's face, flickering like a mirage, stared back. The sealed entity was aware, and watching. Despite the immense energy shielding Kuroboshi, the principal pressed on, determined to break through by sheer will. The air echoed with the sound of metal meeting power, a storm of strikes colliding with supernatural force. Yet the dragon's presence remained unshaken. Orin stood frozen, conflicted. She recalled how Kuroboshi had once risked his life to protect her, and now, despite everything, she found herself unable to move or intervene. But she knew the principal couldn't do it alone. Suddenly, a black hole manifested in Kuroboshi's palm. The miniature dragon, now also wrapped in the radiant blue aura, reappeared. It mocked the situation, belittling the principal. Was this truly the strongest warrior of humanity? The principal, however, simply smirked. If the dragon believed he had shown all his strength, it was mistaken. He resolved to end the battle now. His katana began to glow, radiant with golden light. Energy surged through the blade like a storm. A vortex of power formed around it, amplifying its destructive capability to unprecedented levels. The sight was breathtaking and terrifying. The miniature dragon, despite its arrogance, could not hide its thrill. The rising stakes and overwhelming power electrified the air. Senri watched in alarm. The star element was condensing rapidly into the principal's weapon. The next blow would decide everything. The battle was no longer just a clash between warriors. It was a struggle for the fate of humanity itself. Orin's voice suddenly cut through the chaos. She cried out to Kuroboshi, begging him to remember his promise, the vow to resist the influence of the strongest species. Her plea, filled with desperation and hope, echoed in the charged air. But Kuroboshi didn't respond. His body was still engulfed in the blinding blue aura. The energy intensified further, and from his palm, a monstrous sight began to take form. A massive dragon's mouth materialized, glowing with ominous power. The atmosphere trembled as the entity sealed within Kuroboshi, known as the strongest species, finally made its move. With a deep, guttural laugh, the dragon reveled in its newfound freedom. Its twisted amusement echoed ominously as it taunted the humans, daring them to challenge it. Without hesitation, it lunged forward, jaws open wide to devour everything in sight. Unshaken, the principal stood firm. His katana pulsed with radiant energy, the culmination of his gathered strength. The inevitable collision between his golden light and the dragon's overwhelming power generated a shockwave that rippled through space. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the principal might prevail. But the dragon's sheer magnitude proved too great. With a thunderous crack, the principal's katana shattered, scattering fragments into the air. Staggering backward, the principal stared in disbelief. His most powerful technique had failed. With sinister delight, the dragon basked in its triumph. Its blue flame radiated violently, and its fully unleashed form flickered like ghostly fire. Sharp teeth gleamed, and the creature mockingly declared that it had enjoyed the warm-up. Now, however, it promised a far more gruesome end. It lunged again, jaws poised to finish off the principal. Orin and Senri screamed, panicked and powerless to intervene. Yet, just as the dragon was about to strike, something unexpected happened. A loud crash followed by the dragon's groan cut through the tension. As the dust cleared, the scene took on an almost absurd quality. The dragon's massive head had become wedged in the ceiling. Its glowing eyes darted about in confusion, trying to comprehend its humiliating position. The terrifying beast that had dominated moments earlier now flailed helplessly, like a clumsy intruder in a slapstick farce. The principal, catching his breath, stared in disbelief. Then, the truth hit him. Kuroboshi was back in control. Despite the overwhelming power of the strongest species, Kuroboshi had tricked it. Through their shared connection, he manipulated its body to crash into the ceiling. It was a simple tactic, but one that demonstrated wit over raw strength. Smirking, Kuroboshi faced the stunned principal, who demanded to know whom he was really speaking to, the dragon or the man. Kuroboshi's grin widened. He reminded the principal of his resolve. He had never intended to be swayed by the dragon, no matter the power it offered. Even with everything stacked against him, he held firm to his humanity. Having regained control, Kuroboshi stood tall, his composure restored. The principal, still processing the situation, couldn't hide his astonishment. Even when nearly consumed by the dragon, Kuroboshi had managed to suppress it again. Without hesitation, Kuroboshi grabbed the now miniaturized dragon. The once fearsome beast squirmed, its earlier defiance extinguished by the lingering fear of being consumed once more. With a dark expression, Kuroboshi warned the mini-dragon of the consequences of rebellion. His cold, unwavering gaze sent shivers through the tiny creature. Traumatized by the memory of being devoured, it began stuttering apologies and promises of obedience. The dragon, once proud, had been reduced to a trembling mess, much like a misbehaving child fearing punishment. Reluctantly, the mini-dragon slipped back into the black hole in Kuroboshi's palm. Outwardly composed, Kuroboshi still acknowledged inwardly how little he understood his powers. The black hole, his alpha ability, remained a mystery. Yet, despite the chaos, he stood firm. Senri watched closely. The storm of uncontrolled star element energy had vanished, and in its place was something entirely new. Kuroboshi had become an unranked existence, a classification both strange and ominous. The principal, who had moments earlier faced Kuroboshi with deadly seriousness, now erupted in laughter. With great enthusiasm, he praised Kuroboshi for not only surviving, but mastering the impossible. From the brink of destruction to taming the strongest species, Kuroboshi's performance had far exceeded expectations. Without hesitation, the principal announced Kuroboshi's special enrollment into Hachi School. Kuroboshi, caught off guard, was left speechless. The principal explained that the entire ordeal had been a test. The dragon, though a threat, represented a broader issue. Humanity needed a counterbalance, someone capable of controlling such power without unleashing destruction. Kuroboshi had proven himself by doing just that. Still, Kuroboshi couldn't help but feel manipulated. He accepted the principal's reasoning without complaint, but a bitter taste lingered. Even so, he resolved to help however he could. Whether it meant performing mundane tasks or standing on the front lines, he would support those fighting for humanity's survival. If his abilities ever evolved further, he would use them to protect others. His answer reflected maturity beyond his years, surprising even the principal. With the decision finalized, the principal approached to heal the injury he had inflicted during their confrontation. But to his amazement, the wound had already vanished. Kuroboshi's body, altered by the essence of the strongest species, had developed extraordinary regenerative capabilities. While helpful in the moment, the implications were unsettling. His transformation hinted at deeper, unpredictable changes. Orin, still composed, was assigned to guide Kuroboshi at Hachi School. As the top student, she was the ideal candidate. Though she accepted the responsibility professionally, a flicker of curiosity lit her eyes. Kuroboshi's powers, the sealed dragon, and his unranked status made him a living enigma. The principal then turned to Senri, assigning her to switch classes and observe Kuroboshi closely. Her face lit up with excitement. This was more than a mission. It was a front-row seat to a battle between humanity and the unknown. Even the mini-dragon, peeking nervously from the black hole, trembled at the thought of Senri's enthusiasm. Compared to her, even Kuroboshi seemed less terrifying. As Kuroboshi and Senri shared a light-hearted exchange, the principal leaned toward Orin, mischief in his eyes. With a wry grin, he remarked how things were about to get much more entertaining. Retrieving his tea thermos, he offered her a drink. She politely declined, clearly amused by his casual demeanor. The principal solemnly entrusted Orin with a grave responsibility. Should Kuroboshi ever lose control over the formidable entity within him, she must be prepared to eliminate both him and the creature. This directive was not merely an order, but a heavy burden, one that only an S-ranker like Orin could shoulder. Initially taken aback, she soon embraced the weight of her duty with quiet determination. Though the principal assured her of his intervention if present, his frequent engagements in higher-ranked missions meant the onus would likely fall on her. Reflecting on her recent encounter with Kuroboshi, Orin recalled his selfless act of saving her amidst overwhelming danger. Reconciling the image of this brave boy with the monstrous entity he harbored was challenging. Yet, her commitment wasn't solely out of obligation. It was also a means to repay the debt she owed him. If destiny demanded she confront him one day, she would do so unwaveringly, ensuring the safety of others. Satisfied with her resolve, the principal nodded approvingly. Then, in his characteristic unpredictable manner, he shifted the atmosphere by releasing a surge of power, questioning Kuroboshi if he could sense it. Despite the palpable energy, Kuroboshi felt nothing, indicating a severed connection to the star elements, the source of alpha abilities. The principal's amused expression masked a blend of curiosity and concern. Without delay, the principal assigned a mission to all present, to educate Kuroboshi about star elements and alpha abilities before his official enrollment at Hachi School. The room resonated with determined affirmations as everyone accepted the task. The following day, anticipation hung in the air as Kuroboshi, accompanied by his ever-present mini-dragon, approached the designated training ground. Curiosity and uncertainty intertwined in his thoughts. Standing before the imposing ancient gate of the Mahachi Hot Springs, he wore a puzzled expression. The notion of a hot spring serving as a special training facility seemed absurd. Doubts crept in. Had he misunderstood the directions? Was this a mistake, or perhaps a prank? Before he could delve deeper into his confusion, the soft clacking of wooden sandals drew his attention. Turning towards the sound, he was greeted by Orin and Senri, both elegantly adorned in traditional kimonos. Their vibrant attire accentuated their graceful charm. They welcomed him warmly, confirming that this was indeed the 8th Special Forces training facility. Despite their words, the relaxed, steamy ambience and the lingering mist of the hot spring hardly resembled a rigorous training environment. Kuroboshi's bewilderment intensified upon noticing the girls' refreshed look, as if they had just enjoyed a leisurely soak. He couldn't help but inquire if they had already finished their bath, questioning when the so-called special training would commence. Orin, with an indignant yet playful pout, promptly corrected him, asserting that the hot spring itself was an integral part of their training. Though her words were firm, the sight of her glowing complexion and damp hair suggested otherwise. Kuroboshi's curiosity deepened, but before he could probe further, his attention shifted to Senri. Recalling her injury from the previous battle, he inquired about her leg. Senri reassured him with a smile, explaining that the principal had utilized his alpha ability to heal her, transforming what would have been weeks of recovery into an instant. This miraculous display of power left Kuroboshi both amazed and envious. He couldn't shake the thought that mastering his own alpha abilities might grant him similar prowess. Determined, he clutched the mini-dragon tightly, silently vowing to unlock his potential. However, Senri's attention soon shifted to the small creature. Her curiosity and excitement were palpable as she leaned closer, her fascination evident. Unfortunately for the little dragon, her enthusiasm was far from mutual. The creature trembled in fear, muttering under its breath, referring to Senri as a perverted eye patch woman, before scurrying away to hide. While Kuroboshi found the exchange amusing, Senri's mischievous grin suggested she wasn't done yet. What followed was even more unexpected. With a glint of excitement in her eyes, Senri declared her intent to investigate Kuroboshi's alpha ability. Before he could protest, she reached for his hand, her focus zeroing in on the mysterious black hole embedded within his palm. Without hesitation, she inserted her fingers into it, exclaiming with satisfaction about its depth. Kuroboshi's reaction was immediate and uncontrollable. A burst of laughter erupted as the sensation overwhelmed him, ticklish beyond belief. He pleaded for her to stop, yet Senri only grew more amused, inviting Orion to try as well. Orin, flustered but intrigued, hesitated at the suggestion, admitting that the mere thought made her heart race. Kuroboshi, his face now a brilliant shade of red, protested desperately. The absurdity of the situation was undeniable. The mini-dragon intervened with a fierce chomp, biting down on Senri's finger, expressing its frustration in no uncertain terms. It berated the girls for their disgusting actions, defending its home from further intrusion. Despite the chaos, Senri remained unfazed. If anything, she seemed more amused than ever. However, her brief experiment yielded results. She concluded that Kuroboshi's inability to feel her star element energy indicated a significant problem. The concern in her voice was evident, as she explained that without the ability to sense star elements, Kuroboshi might never awaken his alpha ability. This revelation was crushing. After all the battles and challenges he had faced, the thought of never unlocking his true power was disheartening. Unlike alpha abilities, which were powerful techniques wielded by the strongest beings, star elements served as the essential energy source to activate those abilities. In simple terms, they were like fuel, the cosmic matter that Evis had brought to Earth upon their arrival. Over time, this mysterious energy had spread everywhere, existing abundantly not only in the environment, but also within the bodies of living organisms. Through breathing, eating, and simply existing, humans naturally absorbed and released tiny amounts of star elements. The explanation seemed logical, but Kuroboshi's concern grew when Senri pointed out the main issue. Despite the abundance of star elements, his inability to sense them posed a significant hurdle in his training. Determined to address this, the trio entered the Mahachi Hot Springs facility. The steamy atmosphere was filled with the warmth of natural spring water, and the misty air carried a faint sense of serenity. However, the tranquility didn't last long. Senri, always one to add a playful twist, announced the first step of his training, sensing star elements through the hot spring water. Kuroboshi's curiosity piqued as she approached a nearby water tank, collecting some of the steaming water in a small container. Without hesitation, Orin prepared for her part. Holding her hands above the water, she concentrated, and a visible glow emanated from her palms. She transferred a significant amount of star elements into the water, causing it to shimmer and radiate a mesmerizing light. Senri admired the glowing liquid with satisfaction, commenting on its dense concentration. Meanwhile, Kuroboshi watched in confusion, unable to comprehend what exactly they were doing. Orin explained that by infusing the spring water with star elements, they had created a potent mixture. Drinking it would allow him to experience the presence of star elements firsthand. Kuroboshi's unease grew as she handed him the container, encouraging him to drink it. Her suggestive tone, laced with unnecessary innuendos, earned a flustered reaction from Orin, who protested against her antics. Despite the playful atmosphere, the purpose remained clear. This was a critical part of Kuroboshi's training. Trusting his friends, Kuroboshi resolved to proceed. He lifted the container, determined to overcome whatever awaited him. Sadly, as he drank it, he began to hold his throat, and Senri tells him that concentrated star elements can be poisonous to some people. Kuroboshi wonders why she chose to leave that part out, and let him suffer in pain just for her amusement. He then decides to laugh it off, and go through the pain with a smile. Suddenly, he releases a beam of light from his body, and he can finally feel power coursing through every single blood vessel in his body. He then wonders if what he is feeling is as a result of the star elements. A sudden surge of energy shot through Kuroboshi's body, like a tidal wave of warmth and light. It wasn't painful, but it was intense, electrifying, even. Every nerve in his body buzzed with life, as if some ancient force had finally awakened within him. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down, as his senses heightened. He became hyper-aware of everything. The heat of the spring water, the rustle of leaves in the trees, and the shimmer in the air that had always been there, but never noticed. It dawned on him that this might be the elusive star energy Senri and Orin had been trying to teach him about. A gut instinct told him he was right, and that realization brought a strange comfort. He turned to look at them, silently seeking confirmation. The subtle nod from Senri and the proud expression on Orin's face told him everything he needed to know. He had felt it, truly and completely. As the sensation settled into his body, Kuroboshi's awareness expanded beyond himself. The energy wasn't just within him, it surrounded him. It flowed through the rocks, shimmered in the mist above the hot spring, and pulsed gently in the trees, swaying in the wind. The entire environment seemed alive with it, like the earth itself was breathing. He began to wonder how he had never noticed it before. Had it always been there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone attuned enough to feel it? Orin began to explain, calmly, yet with a trace of reverence in her tone. Earth was rich with star energy, particularly this secluded area where the Hachi Academy had set up its special training grounds. The location wasn't random. It had been chosen specifically for the abundance of energy concentrated here. That's what made it the perfect place for young candidates, like Kuroboshi, to train and learn how to channel their abilities. But just as quickly as it came, the sensation disappeared. Kuroboshi blinked, confused, and slightly panicked. The warmth drained from his limbs, and the pulsing connection he had just felt slipped away like water through his fingers. He could no longer sense the energy around him, and it was as if a door had slammed shut in his mind. Senri, observing this change with her ever-analytical eye, seemed to have reached a conclusion she had been forming for some time. The disappearance of the energy confirmed her hypothesis. The last time she had infused Kuroboshi with star energy, his internal black hole had absorbed it all without a trace. This black hole wasn't just a passive anomaly. It was actively consuming the star elements, leaving him empty each time he tried to harness it. At this rate, as long as the black hole remained inside him, Kuroboshi would never be able to use his alpha ability properly. Despite the discouraging diagnosis, Senri proposed an unconventional solution. She suggested that Kuroboshi soak in the hot springs, allowing his body to absorb the star elements directly from the highly concentrated water. There was a chance, no matter how small, that the full body exposure might alter the interaction between his ability and the black hole. Orin agreed, seeing potential in the idea, but Kuroboshi himself was reluctant. The whole concept sounded absurd to him, soaking in a spring to fix a cosmic anomaly within him. Still, after some coaxing from the two girls, and the increasing pressure to make any progress at all, he begrudgingly agreed. Once inside the steaming pool, Kuroboshi noticed a few other male students lingering nearby. As the strongest species lounged lazily in the hot water, it couldn't resist taking a few jabs at Kuroboshi. Between loud gulps of water and exaggerated sighs of pleasure, it mocked him openly for being a talentless failure, unable to use even the most basic alpha abilities. Kuroboshi felt each word like a stone hurled at his pride. The harsh truth in the insults stung more than anything. He was indeed powerless in a spring filled with raw, potent star energy. Any other trainee would have made strides by now. He was angry, furious even, but mostly at himself. And yet, despite the growing frustration, a deep part of him refused to give up. That unshakable determination, the one trait he had always been proud of, stayed lit like a stubborn ember in the wind. Meanwhile, in the women's bath on the other side of the wall, Senri and Orin spoke in hushed voices. They had reached a private conclusion that they hadn't shared with Kuroboshi. No amount of formal training would help him at this point. Without the ability to store star elements in his body, he simply couldn't advance the way others did. It was cruel, but the best course of action now might be to let him figure it out on his own. Sometimes, breakthroughs were born not from instruction, but from desperation and self-discovery. Back in the men's spring, Kuroboshi's frustration reached a boiling point. He clenched his fists, willing himself to feel something, anything. But nothing changed. Then, as if mocking him further, the black hole in his palm began to stir again, silently and greedily pulling in star energy from the spring. The vortex swirled slightly, invisible to others, but unmistakable to him. The energy he so desperately needed was being devoured before he could use it. Then, something unexpected happened. A strange screen appeared before his eyes, bright, translucent, like a digital display. It hovered in the air just above the water. The message shocked him. The star element accumulation had surpassed the required threshold to seal the strongest species. He had no idea what triggered it, or why now, but the system seemed to be responding to something new within him. A second prompt followed, offering him a choice. Activate a new skill. Jet. Without thinking, driven by instinct and desperation, Kuroboshi accepted. A blinding column of light erupted into the sky, piercing the clouds and sending shockwaves through the surrounding air. The sheer power of it rippled across the academy grounds. Even from the women's bath, Senri and Orin felt the tremor. Alarmed, they quickly grabbed towels and rushed to the source. Arriving at the scene, they found Kuroboshi standing at the edge of the spring, water dripping from his body, utterly naked, but glowing faintly with residual energy. His face lit up when he saw them, and he immediately began trying to explain what had just happened. The morning sun peeked gently over the horizon as Kuroboshi made his way to Hachi Academy, his steps light and energetic. Clad in the fresh, crisp academy uniform that symbolized his entry into a new chapter of his life, he walked with a renewed sense of purpose. The uniform, though modest in design, seemed to carry a weight of pride and responsibility on his shoulders. At his side was the strongest species, now somewhat calmer, and looking genuinely eager to attend its first official class at the academy. Though its presence was still slightly unnerving, Kuroboshi had grown accustomed to its chaotic energy, at least enough to tolerate it. Not long after entering the academy's courtyard, Kuroboshi heard familiar voices calling out to him from behind. Senri and Orin approached, both wearing the standard instructor's coats, though with their own unique flair. As they walked closer, they gave him a warm welcome, commenting on how well he looked in the uniform. There was a hint of pride in their expressions, a quiet acknowledgement of how far he had come since his awkward first encounter with the energy of the stars. Senri, with her ever-blunt tone, took the opportunity to remind Kuroboshi of the incident at the hot spring the day before. With a mischievous gleam in her eye, she recounted his moment of glory and complete nudity. She made a teasing remark about his physique, referencing what she playfully described as scrawny and unimpressive bits. It caught Kuroboshi completely off guard. His face flushed red with embarrassment, while the strongest species beside him burst into uncontrollable laughter, clearly amused by the entire retelling. Once the teasing subsided, Senri became serious again, her focus shifting to more important matters. She asked about Jet, the mysterious new skill Kuroboshi had unlocked during his intense moment in the spring. She was curious whether he could still access it. Kuroboshi, looking slightly defeated, admitted that he hadn't been able to trigger it again. The skill had only appeared in that singular moment, and no matter how much he focused or tried to recreate the sensation, nothing had happened since. Senri speculated that the skill might be tied to a deeper, more mysterious form of alpha ability. Perhaps it was something beyond their current understanding. Kuroboshi, thoughtful as ever, offered another possible explanation. He believed that his inability to summon Jet again might be related to a shortage of star elements within his body. After all, the black hole within him had absorbed most of the energy, especially since it was now being used to seal the strongest species. Orin, always the one to consider every angle, nodded in agreement. She reminded them that during the moment Kuroboshi used Jet, the star energy in the women's bath had vanished completely, as though drawn away by a vacuum. Because of that, she and Senri had been unable to finish their own training session that day. It was a curious coincidence, but one that supported the theory that Jet's activation required a massive and singular release of star energy, perhaps more than Kuroboshi currently possessed. Feeling like a burden, Kuroboshi bowed his head in apology. The moment was sincere, his voice quiet and his posture humble. He didn't like causing trouble for others, especially not his mentors. Orin, caught off guard by his sudden humility, blinked in surprise. Then she laughed lightly and dismissed his worries, claiming she was only teasing him earlier. In truth, she was happy, truly happy, to see that Kuroboshi could finally sense star elements and even tap into his alpha ability, even if only in a limited form. To her, that alone was progress worth celebrating. She concluded their conversation on a motivational note, encouraging everyone, including herself, to continue pushing forward. If they worked together and stayed committed, there was no telling how much stronger they could all become. Kuroboshi took her words to heart. He lifted his head, meeting her gaze with respect and determination, and gave her another bow, this one out of deep appreciation. Orin, watching his sincere gestures, smiled and noted aloud that he was finally beginning to behave like a true Hachi Academy student. Just as she finished her thought, Kuroboshi's expression shifted. He suddenly announced he had somewhere he urgently needed to be. Before anyone could question him further, he sprinted off across the campus. Orin called after him, wondering aloud if he was running late for class. Kuroboshi waved without looking back, assuring her with a confident yell that he wouldn't be. His destination wasn't a classroom. Instead, he made his way to a quiet hospital on the outskirts of the city. Inside one of the rooms, surrounded by pale walls and the steady beeping of life support machines, lay his mother, still and silent, in a coma. Kuroboshi sat beside her, the light in his eyes softening as he gently reached for her hand. He apologized for not visiting over the past week. So much had happened. He told her everything, how he had been accepted into Hachi Academy, how he had begun to feel the power of star elements, and even how he'd discovered his first alpha ability. It wasn't perfect yet, but he was getting closer. He promised her that he would use this power, not just for himself, but to help others, just like they had dreamed of during better days. Standing up, he told her goodbye, and promised to return soon. As they left the hospital, the strongest species glanced back at the room one last time. A strange sensation rippled through its chest, something it couldn't quite explain. There was a brief chill, a momentary flash of discomfort, but rather than dwell on it, it shrugged it off, assuming it was nothing of consequence. Later that day, Kuroboshi raced back toward the Academy's new training facility. As he rounded a corner near the main hall, he collided with another student, nearly knocking both of them off balance. Kuroboshi quickly apologized, stepping back and taking in the student's appearance. The stranger was wrapped in face bandages, concealing nearly every facial feature. Something about the voice that followed clicked instantly in Kuroboshi's mind. It was Hiwashi. Realizing this, Kuroboshi instinctively asked about his injuries, concerned by the extent of the bandaging. But the reaction he received was far from friendly. Hiwashi, clearly offended, grabbed Kuroboshi by the throat with startling speed and intensity. His voice, filled with bitterness and wounded pride, accused Kuroboshi of pitying him. That, to Hiwashi, was the ultimate insult. Kuroboshi quickly tried to explain himself, clarifying that he hadn't meant any harm and was genuinely grateful for what Hiwashi had done, how he had faced the strongest species when no one else could. For a moment, Hiwashi froze. The memory of that brutal fight surged to the surface, replaying in his mind with painful clarity. The humiliation of it still stung deeply. Trying to bridge the gap between them, Kuroboshi extended his hand, offering to put the past behind them and be allies, now that they were both part of the same academy. But instead of accepting the gesture, Hiwashi slapped his hand away, seething with resentment. In his mind, Kuroboshi was still weak, still beneath him. He vowed to crush him, to destroy everything he stood for, even that uniform he now wore with pride. Kuroboshi stood frozen, uncertain of what would come next. Hiwashi's intense glare and words made it clear. This was no longer just rivalry. It was the beginning of something darker and far more personal. And with that, the tension between past and present settled like a storm cloud on the horizon, one that would not easily pass. The courtyard of Hachi Academy buzzed with growing excitement as a fight erupted under the clear midday sky. Students poured in from all corners of the campus, drawn like moths to a flame. The promise of a dramatic clash was irresistible, and soon a thick crowd had gathered, their eager eyes glued to the spectacle. Weaving through the murmuring throng was Orin, her brow furrowed with concern. She elbowed her way forward, demanding space, her voice barely rising above the noise. Declaring her authority as a member of the student council, she finally reached the front, where the scene unfolded with blazing intensity. There, amidst the shouting crowd, fireballs roared across the courtyard. Hawari, one of the Academy's elite A-class combatants, hurled orb after orb of flame with practiced precision. His target, however, was far less graceful. Kuroboshi, clad in simple attire, and known more for his janitorial duties than any combat prowess, darted and dodged with desperation. He ducked behind pillars and rolled across the stone floor, doing everything possible to avoid the searing explosions. Orin's instincts screamed at her to intervene, but before she could step in, Senri slipped beside her. A gleam of amusement danced in Senri's eyes. She suggested they simply let the scene play out. After all, it was proving to be quite the show. Orin protested, pointing out that Hawari's rank and battle experience far surpassed Kuroboshi's. It was hardly a fair match. But Senri shrugged, reminding her that if Kuroboshi hoped to join Hachi Academy, he would have to prove his strength sooner or later. In the arena, Hawari unleashed another volley. Flames surged through the air, casting flickering light across the stunned onlookers. Kuroboshi scrambled away, sweat and soot covering his skin. Hawari's voice rang out, mocking him, branding him a coward. From the back, even the strongest species, an ancient, monstrous entity known for its disdain for the weak, laughed and cheered for Hawari, reveling in Kuroboshi's humiliation. Kuroboshi's breath came in ragged gasps. He couldn't keep running. The jet skill he had been granted was still locked. His body wasn't ready to wield it. Panic clawed at his thoughts, but then his eyes fell upon the mark on his palm, a swirling dark hole that pulsed faintly. Desperation gave way to a spark of hope. Across the battlefield, Hawari began charging a larger fireball, concentrating more power than before. It glowed with intensity, a miniature sun in the palm of his hand. He launched it straight at Kuroboshi, but this time, Kuroboshi did not run. He raised his hand and pointed the dark hole directly at the oncoming blast. Maybe, just maybe, it would absorb the attack. The fireball roared closer. The crowd held its breath. Hawari's aim slipped. His attack veered slightly, almost striking the strongest species, who narrowly dodged it with a snarl. The fireball, however, continued unimpeded and crashed into Kuroboshi's chest. The impact hurled him backward, and he crumpled to the ground, unmoving. For a moment, silence swept across the field. Then, inexplicably, the crowd erupted into cheers for Kuroboshi. Despite his fall, they admired his resolve. Somewhere in that painful effort, he had won their respect. Lying on the scorched tiles, Kuroboshi groaned, confused. Why hadn't the dark hole absorbed the fireball? The strongest species loomed over him, furious. It chastised him bitterly, warning that if he ever endangered it again, it would end his life. Then came the explanation. Hawari's fireballs, though created using star elements, were not star elements themselves. The dark hole could only consume the raw essence, not something artificially shaped by it. As a compromise, the strongest species offered to lend him its power, just once. But Kuroboshi refused. That kind of strength came with too high a price. Before he could reconsider, Hawari approached with deadly intent. Flames curled along his arms, his expression unhinged with fury. He vowed to incinerate Kuroboshi for embarrassing him. Kuroboshi barely managed to rise when Hawari raised his arm to strike again. But this time, Kuroboshi reached out and grabbed Hawari's forearm. The fire vanished. Just like that, the blazing heat that had wrapped Hawari's body snuffed out completely. The A-class warrior recoiled, stunned. He accused Kuroboshi of interfering with his abilities, but Kuroboshi remained quiet, confused as much by what had happened as his opponent. Then came the message from the system monitor. His jet skill was now available. Kuroboshi hesitated. That power wasn't meant for a fellow human. It was too destructive, too raw. He couldn't... But Hawari, unaware, lunged forward with a punch. Instinct took over. Kuroboshi raised his palm. Light exploded from it. A blinding beam of condensed energy erupted from his hand, the raw manifestation of the jet skill. It struck Hewari squarely in the chest, lifting him off his feet and launching him high into the air. He soared above the crowd before crashing violently onto the courtyard tiles. Silence followed, then gasps. Hewari did not get up. The crowd burst into wild cheers. They had just witnessed an underdog toppling an A-class titan. Students chanted Kuroboshi's name, their excitement swelling with each passing moment. Among them, Senri clapped with delight. Orin exhaled in relief. Neither had truly expected this outcome, yet both welcomed it. Kuroboshi stood amid the roar, his expression unreadable. Something didn't sit right. He hadn't meant to activate the jet skill, so why had it triggered? He looked down at his hand, still glowing faintly. Doubts filled his mind. After the chaos of the courtyard battle, the campus of Hachi Academy gradually returned to its usual rhythm. Students filtered back into classrooms, buzzing with excitement, retelling the fight blow by blow. Kuroboshi, though slightly scorched and mentally drained, returned to his class as well. His entrance didn't go unnoticed. The classroom, once filled with idle chatter, fell into murmurs and hushed awe as soon as he walked in. His reputation had arrived long before he did. The homeroom teacher introduced him formally, though the students barely needed the introduction. They had seen the spectacle themselves, the underdog who dared to stand against an A-class and walked away victorious. They whispered his name with admiration, grinning as they clapped him on the back. Kuroboshi bowed deeply, apologizing for his late arrival, only for the teacher to remind everyone that he had already paid for it. 10 laps around the school as punishment. The class chuckled, and the teacher sternly warned them to stay out of trouble unless they wanted to share his fate. During the break, the buzz around Kuroboshi hadn't died down. Senri appeared, a wide smile plastered across her face as she praised his performance. Few students managed to stir such drama on their first day. Her tone turned playful as she added that Kuroboshi had already been summoned to the principal's office and received a stern lecture, which, according to her, was a grueling endurance trial of its own. Kuroboshi could still hear the principal's droning voice in his ears. Not long after, Orin arrived, far less impressed and far more irritated. She chastised him with cold precision for getting into a fight on his first day. Her words were sharp, her tone icy, quite literally, as she conjured a frosty sphere in her hand and rolled it between her fingers. She declared herself responsible for keeping him in check, threatening to freeze him solid if he ever fought another student again. Kuroboshi and the strongest species lurking inside him both recoiled at the threat, shivering as if the temperature around them had dropped. He apologized swiftly, not daring to provoke her further. Senri, ever fascinated by power, pivoted the conversation toward his abilities. She spoke with the energy of a seasoned researcher, explaining the nature of his alpha skill. His power, she said, was divided into 2 distinct but connected halves. First, the black hole embedded in his palm, capable of absorbing star elements directly from whatever it touched. Then came Jet, the second half, which allowed him to expel those stored elements in explosive, focused bursts. It was a power eerily reminiscent of real black holes, which consumed all nearby matter, and in rare cases, fired out narrow jets of supercharged energy. Despite the admiration, Kuroboshi wasn't comforted. Deep down, he feared the unstable nature of his ability. It activated without warning, beyond his control, and that terrified him. As he stood silently, lost in thought, a voice reached him. A student nearby had been watching with curious eyes. He cleaned his hands with a cloth, speaking softly but earnestly. The boy recognized Kuroboshi, not from the fight, but from his days as a janitor at the academy. He spoke of the hard work Kuroboshi had done, sweeping the halls and scrubbing floors without complaint. To him, that was impressive. Kuroboshi, surprised by the sincerity, smiled with rare warmth and gratitude. The boy introduced himself as Kani Abuku, a B-rank student. He extended a hand of friendship, which Kuroboshi gladly accepted. But Connie was confused. How could someone with such an incredible ability have no rank at all? The peaceful moment didn't last long. A pair of hands suddenly grabbed Kuroboshi's head from behind, jerking him slightly. It was Hewari, the flame wielder, now stripped of dignity, but not of ego. He jeered at Kuroboshi and Kanye, mocking the idea of low ranks and unranked nobodies forming friendships. Hachi Academy, he sneered, had become a circus of incompetence. Before the tension could escalate further, a green orb slammed into Hewari from behind, sending him crashing into the classroom window with a loud thud. Silence fell. Eyes turned to the entrance, where a green-haired figure now stood, arms crossed and expression unimpressed. Ida Raisin had arrived. A second-year S-ranker, Ida exuded an aura of effortless menace. He stepped forward, ignoring Hewari's groaning form, and began tearing into him verbally. He reminded Hewari of his humiliating defeat against an unranked student, mocking him for provoking Class 1 to attack the strongest species, only to get wiped out. The results had been catastrophic, and the blame, in Ida's eyes, fell squarely on Hewari's shoulders. With disgust, Ida revoked Hewari's rank, and then turned his gaze on the rest of the room. He called all the first years pathetic, weak, and unworthy. He lamented the fact that the principal had tasked him with overseeing their development. The strongest among them had already been wiped out thanks to Hewari, and now their future looked bleak. In response, Ida declared a new challenge, a selection exam. Every first year would be forced to participate. Their mission, to hunt Eva-class creatures. The requirement, 5 confirmed kills of A-rank Evas or higher. Failure would mean expulsion. Rank or no rank, survival of the fittest had become the rule. The announcement stunned the students. Some protested, calling it a death sentence. But Ida remained unmoved. To him, they were just liabilities, unless they proved otherwise. He then pointed directly at Kuroboshi. Despite the principal's permission to let him in, Ida didn't acknowledge him as one of them. He declared Kuroboshi suspicious, referencing his mysterious appearance at the site where the strongest species vanished. There were too many unanswered questions surrounding the boy, with no past and a power that defied explanation. Kuroboshi stood frozen, unable to offer a defense. Ida's words echoed through his mind, as the weight of judgment fell heavily on his shoulders. Not long after Ida's chilling declaration, the first years surged into motion, sprinting across the rugged landscape toward the exam venue. The rush was fueled not only by fear of failure, but by a desperate desire to prove themselves. Kuroboshi, who had been running all day, groaned in protest, his body already aching from the constant exertion. Senri, keeping pace beside him, reassured him with a smile, but even her confidence was beginning to wear thin. They had been running for nearly 3 hours, and their destination, supposedly a town, looked nothing like one. The area was desolate, crumbling buildings lining empty streets, and not a single soul in sight. Orin finally offered an explanation, her voice clipped but clear. The group had passed beyond the defensive perimeter into territory long abandoned due to the advance of the Avas. Humanity had withdrawn into massive cities and the surrounding farmlands, clinging to isolated strongholds for survival. With Avas infesting land, sea, and sky, global travel had become nearly impossible. Worse still, the proliferation of star elements, the mysterious source of alpha abilities, had disrupted communications, leaving each city to fend for itself in silence. Kuroboshi, attempting to catch his breath, recalled the stories spread through media and propaganda. Tales of humanity awakening to alpha powers and turning the tide against the Avas. Senri, however, shattered the illusion, admitting that much of it was a manufactured narrative. In reality, only a fraction of the population had awakened, and most were far too weak to make a difference. Their conversation ended abruptly when Ida's voice pierced the air. He barked at the students to stop dawdling. The exam venue was in sight. If they valued their future at the academy, they needed to run like their lives depended on it. Motivated by a blend of fear and adrenaline, the students pushed forward in unison. Kuroboshi, however, found his thoughts trailing. Ida's earlier words still echoed in his head. He had not been acknowledged. Suspicion hung over him like a shadow, and he realized that if anyone uncovered the truth about his connection to the strongest species, his life would be in real danger. By the time he snapped out of his thoughts, both Orin and Senri had sprinted ahead. He gritted his teeth and forced his legs to move faster, determined not to fall behind. Soon, the group reached their destination, a dense forest nestled against a looming mountain. Kuroboshi leaned forward, gasping for air, only to jump slightly as Orin appeared silently behind him. She offered unexpected praise, impressed that he had managed to keep up despite lacking formal training. Kuroboshi claimed that he had been training hard in secret, driven by the knowledge that without an alpha ability, stamina would be his only strength. Orin gave him a nod of approval, just as Ida stepped forward and ordered everyone to gather around. The selection exam was about to begin. Ida explained the rules in his usual tone, cold, efficient, and merciless. Every student was to enter the mountain and hunt no fewer than 5 A-class EVAs. They were not allowed to return until the task was completed. Failure meant immediate expulsion. The announcement sparked anxiety among the crowd. One student, unable to contain his fear, protested. Most of them were only B ranks, and facing an A-class EVA was essentially a death sentence. Ida's response was swift and brutal. He shattered the student's rank badge and declared him expelled on the spot. His speed was blinding, so fast that even Kuroboshi failed to track his movement. Ida, now standing at the center of the stunned group, continued his lecture. The battlefield would not adjust itself to match their capabilities. Weaker EVAs would not appear just because they were lower ranked. The appearance of the strongest species had proven that the enemy did not care about fairness. Victory would only come to those willing to adapt, to think critically, and to fight with everything they had. If they could not do that, then they should prepare to die trying. The speech left the students shaken, but determined. Like a wave, they surged into the forest, their eyes wide with fear, yet burning with resolve. Kuroboshi followed closely behind. He would not be left behind. He would do whatever he could, no matter the odds. As the last of the group disappeared into the dense foliage, only Orin and Senri remained behind. The silence between them was heavy. Orin voiced her concern about the unrealistic expectations placed upon the students. Hunting even one A-rank EVA was like taking on a modern tank, deadly and nearly impossible. Senri agreed, her voice tinged with worry. The survival rate was uncertain, and neither of them could predict how many would come back alive. They made plans to assist from the shadows, intending to prevent unnecessary deaths. Unfortunately, Ida intervened once again. He declared that both of them would be participating in a special exam with him instead. Their hopes of protecting the others were dashed in an instant. Deeper inside the forest, Kuroboshi wandered alone, guided more by instinct than strategy. The enthusiasm that had carried him this far had faded, leaving only the pressure of the looming task. He had no idea how to track an A-class EVA, and he was beginning to feel the creeping dread of failure. Meanwhile, the strongest species inside him stirred with amusement, offering once again to take control and annihilate the EVAs in his place. The memory of the principal's warning resurfaced like a sharp blade. The strongest species had to remain a secret. If word reached the other S-tankers, Kuroboshi would become a target for elimination. He rejected the offer, insisting that he would complete the exam with his own strength. Surprisingly, the strongest species did not lash out. Instead, it chuckled and told him to call for help if things became too dangerous. Kuroboshi found its cooperative tone unsettling, as if it were biding its time, waiting for something. Their internal argument was cut short by a sudden, piercing scream in the distance. Kuroboshi's head snapped around just as the ground shook beneath his feet. From the shadows emerged a towering figure, muscular, grotesque, and radiating an aura of menace. It had a single glaring eye and moved with unnatural speed. Kuroboshi froze as the monstrous creature, lunged after another student in the distance. There was no mistaking it. This was an Eva, an A-class at the very least, and it was massive. His trial had truly begun. The creature standing before Kuroboshi towered at over 3 meters tall, a massive beast thrumming with unrestrained fury. Its body was covered in rough, cracked hide, and its breath steamed in the cool forest air. Each movement it made sent tremors through the ground. Judging by its size and violent temperament, Kuroboshi figured this might be one of the A-rank Evas they had been warned about. The Eva suddenly raised one massive hoof and brought it crashing down, aiming to flatten a struggling student beneath it. As the dust cleared, Kuroboshi's heart dropped. The one caught in the beast's crosshairs was Kani, his only real friend among the new recruits. Without hesitation, he sprang into motion, legs pumping with raw urgency. His mind raced even faster than his feet. He possessed no active alpha ability, no star element to speak of. However, his body was unique, forged from the DNA of the strongest species. This gave him one advantage: the ability to absorb star elements through direct contact. It was a gamble, but it was all he had. As he neared the Eva, he reached out and slapped his palm against its hide. The creature's reaction was immediate and violent. It bucked wildly, throwing Kuroboshi through the air like a rag doll. His back slammed into a tree trunk with a sickening crack, and he crumpled to the ground, pain blooming across his spine. Kani called out, panicked and guilt-ridden, believing it was his fault. Despite the agony, Kuroboshi forced himself upright. The truth was, he only survived the impact because his body wasn't entirely human. It was tougher, stronger, built to endure more than ordinary flesh ever could. Still, the pain was real. Inside his mind, the voice of the strongest species stirred once more, offering assistance. It scoffed at his near-death experience, warning him that dying just to absorb energy from a low-tier Eva would damage whatever reputation he hoped to build. Kuroboshi pushed the voice aside, refusing to give in. He vowed to defeat the Eva himself, without relying on the monster lurking inside him. With that, he launched himself forward again, still lacking a real plan, but driven by sheer will. As he ran, he activated the little star element he had managed to absorb during the brief contact. His jet skill flickered to life, a burst of speed and propulsion. The jet stream slammed into the Eva, a direct hit. The result, however, was underwhelming. The Eva remained standing, barely flinching. Its rage intensified. Kuroboshi's gamble had backfired. He was now completely drained of star elements, standing defenseless in front of a furious beast. Just as the creature lowered its head to charge, something strange occurred. Dozens of shimmering bubbles drifted through the air, catching the sunlight and scattering it in a kaleidoscope of colors. The boar-like Eva froze in confusion. Each bubble reflected its image, dozens of warped versions of itself floating around the clearing. The beast recoiled, clearly disturbed by what it saw. Taking advantage of the distraction, Kuroboshi dodged as the creature lunged forward. The Eva barreled past him and crashed into a tree, dazed. From the distance, a familiar voice called out, urging him to run. Kuroboshi turned and saw Kani, who had been the source of the floating illusions. They bolted through the forest side by side, the sounds of the enraged Eva growing quieter behind them. Kuroboshi shouted his thanks, realizing that the harmless-looking bubbles were, in fact, Kani's alpha ability. Though they lacked offensive power, they had proven useful in a way no one had anticipated. As they caught their breath, Kuroboshi noticed one of the bubbles had attached itself to his arm. It didn't pop or drift away. Instead, it seemed to cling to the fabric of his uniform, soaking into the fibers like water into cloth. He poked it, but it remained stuck. Kani muttered about how useless his ability was in actual combat. He had considered dropping out of the exam entirely, frustrated by his lack of talent in battle. Kuroboshi, however, saw something different. He studied the behavior of the bubble closely. It didn't burst, didn't fade, and it appeared to react to physical contact. The interaction hinted at hidden potential. Turning to Kani, Kuroboshi suggested they might be able to defeat the boar using that very ability. The idea sounded absurd, even to Kani, who had spent the better part of the day complaining about his lack of usefulness. Still, the evidence was right in front of them. After narrowly escaping the rampaging boar, Kuroboshi and Kani finally came to a halt, both panting and drenched in sweat. The dense forest around them seemed to exhale with them, the silence settling in now that danger had momentarily passed. The air was still, the tension easing from their limbs as they leaned against trees, gathering what little strength remained. Kuroboshi turned toward Kani with curiosity, puzzled by his earlier resolve to quit Hachi school. It baffled him that someone with such a unique ability would consider giving up. Kani, however, looked away, his expression clouded with disappointment. He explained that his alpha ability was limited to producing sticky bubbles, and nothing more. In a school where destructive power reigned supreme, where students like Hawari and Orin dazzled with overwhelming abilities, his abilities seemed like a joke. Other students had ridiculed him from the beginning, branding his powers as weak and worthless. Over time, that ridicule began to rot into self-doubt. As Kani spoke, he realized Kuroboshi was not entirely paying attention. The boy was crouched, poking the bubbles with his fingers and marveling at them like a child who had just discovered a hidden treasure. Kani's frustration grew until Kuroboshi stood and explained something that had caught his attention. Earlier, he had tried sticking one of the bubbles to the ground. Surprisingly, the moment it soaked into the sand, the terrain solidified into a rock-like substance. That meant the bubbles had potential, not as direct weapons, but as tools that could change the battlefield itself. Kani dismissed the theory as fanciful. To him, it was just another false hope. He had trained, struggled, and experimented with his ability, yet it had never amounted to anything useful in a fight. The last thing he needed now was more disappointment. However, Kuroboshi's optimism did not waver. When asked why he could remain so cheerful, even after his own ability had failed against the boar, he simply repeated his favorite belief, that a person's worth wasn't defined by what they had, but by what they chose to do. He proposed a new idea. If they worked together, combining both their abilities and their effort, they might be able to bring down the boar. The concept was reckless and bold, but more importantly, it was possible. Eventually, they crept back through the underbrush, moving cautiously toward the area where they had last encountered the Eva. The boar remained there, pacing restlessly. The irritation from earlier had faded, and the bubbles that once blinded it had dissolved into the forest air. Nevertheless, it hadn't strayed far, as if guarding its territory. Kuroboshi didn't hesitate. He picked up a rock, hurled it at the creature, and then taunted it with a theatrical flourish. Predictably, the boar snorted in fury and charged at him. Rather than engage, Kuroboshi turned tail and fled. Initially, Kani had hesitated to rejoin the plan. He worried that he would only drag Kuroboshi down. However, the unwavering determination of his friend shifted something inside him. Though unsure of his worth, he found himself running into danger once again, compelled not by courage, but by belief. Belief in Kuroboshi. Kuroboshi, on the other hand, ran with a singular goal. He needed to lure the boar to a very specific spot in the forest. Despite the pain still lingering from their previous encounter, he pressed forward, pushing his battered body beyond its limits. When the boar inevitably caught up, it slammed into him from behind. The impact sent him stumbling, breath knocked from his lungs, but he kept running. As the ground narrowed and their destination neared, bubbles shimmered through the air once again. They floated lazily, yet deliberately, in front of the charging beast. The boar hesitated, its vision distorted, movement slowed. Kani had arrived just in time, using his bubbles to interfere with the creature's perception. Kuroboshi seized the moment. With the boar momentarily disoriented, he sprinted ahead toward a marker, an old handkerchief tied to a branch high in the trees. It signaled the exact location of his trap. He leapt over the patch of forest floor beneath it, careful not to touch it. The boar followed, unable to stop its momentum. The ground gave way beneath it, With a heavy crash, the beast tumbled into a deep pit that had been dug and disguised earlier. It flailed, attempting to climb out, but its movements were sluggish and erratic. Koroboshi leapt down after it, not to fight, but to finish what they had started. As he landed beside the thrashing creature, he revealed the secret of the trap. The entire pit had been coated in Connie's adhesive bubbles. Now, the boar was stuck, unable to move, snarling in frustration. Calmly, Koroboshi placed his hand on the beast's hide and began absorbing its star elements. The transfer was smooth and powerful, a surge of energy flooding into him. A familiar interface flickered into view, displaying that his jet skill had been recharged. He accepted the prompt without hesitation. The jet skill ignited, pure propulsion bursting from his limbs. After the intense battle ended in victory, Koroboshi let out a triumphant scream, his voice echoing through the forest. His joy, however, was abruptly cut short. A brilliant beam of light erupted from beneath the defeated boar, blasting him into the air with tremendous force. He landed hard on the ground several meters away, groaning as pain surged through his body. As he struggled to sit up, his eyes widened at the spectacle before him. The boar had vanished entirely, leaving behind a single glowing jewel where it once lay. Even the ever-mocking strongest species residing within him fell silent in shock. Moments later, Kanny hurried into the pit, his concern evident. Koroboshi, still lying on his side, assured him with a grin that he was mostly fine, though his backside had certainly seen better days. He gestured toward the jewel, explaining how the boar had seemingly vanished and been replaced by the radiant object. Connie's expression shifted the moment he laid eyes on it. Recognition dawned. The object, Connie explained, was an element stone. When an Eva dies, the star elements within its body do not dissipate. Instead, they crystallize under intense pressure, forming these rare and potent stones. The one in front of them shimmered with a concentrated light, suggesting that the boar had stored its star elements predominantly in its eyes. Its power had not merely been brute strength. It had been focused, precise, and dangerous. As they both knelt beside the jewel, marveling at its beauty, Koroboshi recounted Kanny's explanation to ensure he understood. Element stones, he now knew, were incredibly valuable. Beyond replenishing depleted star elements, they could be forged into powerful weapons. Their value even surpassed that of traditional precious metals, making them prized among hunters and warriors alike. However, not everyone in the area saw the jewel with noble intentions. Within Kuroboshi's mind, the strongest species observed the element stone with greedy interest. It believed the stone could grant it temporary control, enough to act freely. With that window of time, it fantasized about obliterating humanity and bringing chaos to the world. It pleaded with Kuroboshi to let it hold the stone, promising no regrets. Its tone, however, dripped with malevolence. Kuroboshi responded by smacking the entity back into silence, refusing to trust it with such power. From Connie's perspective, Kuroboshi seemed to be talking to himself again. Still unable to perceive the strongest species, he voiced mild concern. Kuroboshi brushed it off, assuring him all was fine. The moment passed, and both boys exchanged a silent nod of respect. They had done something extraordinary. With 10 Avas in total taken down, they had exceeded the individual quota of 5. Nevertheless, their task was far from over. Elsewhere, a very different kind of battle was unfolding. Ida, one of Hachi School's top figures, stood engaged in a brutal sparring session against Orin and Senri. Despite their combined efforts, both girls were clearly outmatched. Ida dominated the match effortlessly, dodging strikes and delivering punishing blows with precision. As they collapsed, gasping for breath, he berated them harshly. He accused them of lacking the resolve and strength required to hold the S-Class title. He questioned whether the rank certification exam had been flawed, considering their poor performance. Turning his attention to Orin, he observed a lack of true killing intent in her alpha ability. This, he declared, made her spineless. His words struck a chord within her, triggering memories of the principal's secret directive. Should Kuroboshi lose control and the strongest species emerge, she would be the one tasked with eliminating him. Shifting focus to Senri, Ida reprimanded her as well. He accused her of concealing the true extent of her powers and warned that he saw through her deception. His tone made it clear that those who underestimated him would not be allowed to walk away unscathed. Senri's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected her act to be so easily seen through. At that moment, a group of students arrived at the training grounds. Clutched in their hands were various element stones, clear proof of their victories. Ida looked them over, noting only 6 survivors out of the 30 who had embarked on the mission. His expression remained stoic as he moved to examine the stones they had collected. Before he could begin, Kuroboshi and Kane appeared, their element stones stacked in a neat bundle. They announced their impressive feat, 10 A-rank EVAs taken down together. Ida raised an eyebrow in surprise. Their cooperation had clearly been effective. Kuroboshi explained that they had used strategy and combined their alpha abilities just as instructed. Though skeptical, Ida decided to allow their results to count. After carefully inspecting the stones, he confirmed that 8 students had passed the selection exam. The remainder, he announced coldly, would have their ranks revoked and be expelled. According to Ida, those who failed today would most certainly perish on future missions. His words carried the weight of experience. He reminded the group of a tragic incident in which an entire first-year class had been wiped out after charging into battle without a solid plan. Hachi School, he emphasized, trained its students to face opponents far beyond their natural abilities. This was why strategy, teamwork, and resourcefulness were more critical than raw power alone. With the selection exam concluded, Ida delivered their next assignment. The following day, the remaining students would take part in a large-scale operation against an S-rank EVA colony. His words sent a ripple of dread through the group. These colonies, he explained, were not only growing in number, but also transforming the Earth's environment to match their homeworld. Their expansion had already led to countless civilian deaths. Immediate action was necessary. Participation in the operation would include all who passed, including Senri and Orin. Ida turned to retrieve the dropouts, and instructed the others to rest while awaiting transport. The fight ahead would require every ounce of strength they could muster. As the students dispersed, Kuroboshi stood speaking quietly with Kanye. Ida observed from a distance, his expression unreadable. He had not expected Kuroboshi to pass the exam, let alone exceed expectations. Nevertheless, he could not afford to take chances. If Kuroboshi ever lost control, if the strongest species truly revealed itself, then Ida knew exactly what had to be done. Without hesitation, he would be the one to end it. Late into the night, the bus hummed steadily across the darkened landscape, carrying the students who had passed the grueling selection exam toward their next trial, the extermination of an S-class EVA nest colony. Kuroboshi sat near the window, watching the blur of moonlit scenery rush by as the hours slipped quietly into dawn. He glanced behind him to find Orin and Senri slumped against the bus seats, fast asleep, their bodies clearly still drained from the day's earlier exertions. Despite the exhaustion that clung to everyone like a second skin, sleep eluded Kuroboshi. His thoughts drifted back to the past month. It felt like a lifetime ago, when he was powerless, isolated, and not even part of a school, much less one renowned for raising EVA hunting warriors. Back then, he had nothing. No friends, no purpose, no strength. Now, things were different. The weight of camaraderie and responsibility sat heavily on his shoulders. The memory of the principal's warning rang in his ears like an unshakable echo, urging him to keep the strongest species within him hidden. Exposure meant death, not just for him, but potentially for everyone else. With that constraint looming over him, he wondered if Jet, his own alpha ability, would be enough in the fight ahead. Uncertainty gnawed at him. Star elements were crucial to fuel alpha abilities, and he didn't even know if he'd get the chance to gather them before battle. Frustration boiled inside his chest, tightening like a knot. As despair began to take root, his mother's voice rose from the past, reciting words she once offered him. The memory carried warmth, but it also brought fear. The thought of losing her, of her dying in this chaotic world, made him tremble. Sensing his growing distress, the strongest species emerged from the black void within his soul. Its presence was overwhelming, yet oddly calming. It addressed his trembling with a cold truth forged from centuries of battle. Those who trembled before the fight never made it to the fight. According to it, the path ahead would inevitably lead Kuroboshi back to its power, and when that moment came, it would be waiting with open arms. After delivering its prophecy, the entity sank back into the abyss, leaving Kuroboshi alone once more. Eventually, sleep claimed him at last. By morning, the bus pulled to a halt at the edge of a mist-covered valley. Jagged cliffs loomed ahead, casting long shadows over the mouth of a massive cave nestled within the rock. The air felt dense, charged with an unseen force. Ida stood at the front, rallying the students and leading them toward their destination. 6 unfamiliar faces joined the ranks, newbie rankers named Yomano Zen, Tada Yoshinito, Tsukura Ritsu, Ebodake Ken, Momokawa Koishi, and Mukumoto Hazel. They walked with nervous energy, clearly aware of the danger that awaited them. The cave, gaping and silent, marked the entrance to the S-Class Eva nest. Ida explained that the Avas inside likely already knew they were coming. However, they wouldn't emerge to fight openly. They held the advantage in their fortified home. The students would have to go in after them. To prepare the team, Ida called upon Connie, the group's most reliable source of information, to detail the nature of the nest. Connie stepped forward and explained that the colony resembled the natural environment of the Eva homeworld. It was saturated with a substance known as enemy elements, a twisted form of star energy that empowered Avas while hindering humans. Within this space, even the strongest alpha users could only access 30% of their true capabilities. This was what made S-Class nests so deadly. Ida continued the briefing by emphasizing that modern weapons would be useless. Missiles, bullets, and explosions meant nothing to Avas. Even burying them alive was ineffective. Only alpha abilities, powered by star elements, could bring these monsters down. The students would have to rely solely on their training and abilities if they hoped to survive. He called Senri forward. Her alpha ability, Celestial Observation, was essential for what came next. Unfazed by the challenge, Senri activated her power. Immediately, her perception extended into the cave, scanning the depths with eerie precision. Star elements lit up her mental map, revealing a sprawling labyrinth designed to confuse and entrap intruders. The Avas had carved the interior into a maze, teeming with movement. She identified multiple A-class Evas crawling through the maze, bipedal and insectoid, which she dubbed bipedal ants. Kuroboshi watched in awe. Senri's ability allowed her to interpret terrain and life forms by tracking the flow of star elements, something beyond the capabilities of most alpha users. Her eyes remained locked on the glowing image inside her mind as she pressed deeper into the maze. At last, she found the colony's center. There, a towering Ava stood, dwarfing the rest. Its presence pulsed with overwhelming power. There was no doubt, it was the nest's boss. What unsettled her most was its behavior. The massive creature clutched one of its own, a bipedal ant, and devoured it with disturbing delight. Its savagery was matched only by its intelligence, and then it did something even more chilling. It turned toward her. The creature had sensed her observation. Startled, Senri quickly deactivated her alpha ability. Her breath caught in her throat as she raced to report her findings to Ida. Her voice, although composed, carried urgency. This was not merely an S-Class nest. The being inside displayed intelligence and combat capabilities that exceeded the known S-Class limits. It did not fit within the regular hierarchy. She labeled it an S+ class Eva humanoid nest, a designation reserved for threats beyond the normal scale. With their current manpower and resources, engaging the nest would almost certainly result in their annihilation. Senri concluded her report with a single, unwavering recommendation: retreat. The revelation hit the group like a hammer striking glass, shattering whatever fragile confidence remained among the students. Fear deepened in their eyes, tightening every breath and movement. Until that moment, many had believed the S-Class designation was the pinnacle of EVA danger. Even Kuroboshi, who had faced his share of terror, found himself confused. Everything he had learned told him S-Class was the peak. How could there be something beyond that? Fortunately, Kani, ever the academic among warriors, offered clarity. In the hierarchy devised by humans, EVA combat abilities were ranked from F at the weakest to S at the most powerful. Rankers were special individuals capable of confronting EVAs, matching their own classification. Presently, 10 S rankers existed, individuals whose strength allowed them to face and defeat an S-Class EVA on their own. However, this measure also represented the ceiling of what humans could manage alone. The creature inside the nest colony was not an ordinary S-Class EVA. It was something far more dangerous, a relic of fear from the past known as an S-plus class EVA. These rare beings had once surfaced long ago and were marked not only by immense combat prowess, but by minds honed with frightening intelligence. It had taken the combined effort of 2 S-rankers to bring one down back then. This current humanoid, now feeding and breeding other EVAs, had effectively turned the nest into a grotesque farm. Orin was the one who finally voiced what others dared not say. The power gap between the S-Class and this S-plus EVA was not merely a step, it was a chasm. The students now stood on the edge of an abyss, and many were unsure if they could leap across. Once the full report was delivered to Ida, all eyes turned to him, awaiting his decision. No one knew whether he would call for retreat or sacrifice. However, Ida made his decision clear with the calm precision of a blade drawn in war. There would be no retreat. The mission would proceed. His reasoning silenced all further protest. This humanoid was likely similar to the one recorded in past history, possessing the terrifying ability to absorb star elements from its prey and evolve. Waiting would only give it time to grow stronger, time they could not afford. Now that its presence had been discovered, striking swiftly was their only chance. If they delayed, the battle would shift irreversibly in the creature's favor. Kuroboshi reflected on the earlier prophecy delivered by the strongest species within him. That creature had foretold the moment he would be forced to rely on its power. Yet, standing there, Kuroboshi resolved not to falter. Even in the shadow of the unknown, he would not allow himself to lose. He believed that if he could help, even in the smallest way, then he had to step forward. Moved by his resolve, Orin found courage stirring in her own heart. She stepped toward Ida and requested the lead. With a nod of approval, he granted her command. The rest of the team watched as she approached the mouth of the cave, her presence radiating an intensity that cut through their fear like sunlight through fog. Standing before the cave's gaping maw, Orin began to gather star elements. The air around her shimmered with power, and the ground beneath her feet trembled as her alpha ability surged to life. The temperature dropped rapidly, and her breath crystallized in the air as she unleashed her attack. Ice Star. A brilliant beam of frost shot into the cave, freezing everything in its path. Within seconds, the interior was locked in a glacial prison. The rumbling of insectoid limbs ceased. Even the natural hostility of the environment, the oppressive force of the enemy elements, faded into stillness. Inside the ice-bound maze, the A-class EVAs stood like statues, their advance permanently halted. Senri confirmed what they were all witnessing. The enemy elements had ceased to function, and every A-class creature inside the maze had been neutralized. A stunned silence settled over the group as Kuroboshi came to a new understanding. This was the might of an S-ranker, a level of strength that dwarfed his own. In the face of such overwhelming power, all he could feel was awe. Ida's voice cut through the silence, issuing the order they had all been waiting for. Now that the cave's hostile elements had been frozen, alpha abilities could be used freely. The advantage had shifted. With Orin's intervention, the battlefield had changed. He declared that he and Orin would take on the S-plus humanoid. Their experience and power made them the most capable of confronting a foe of that magnitude. As for the rest, their mission was equally critical. Deep inside the frozen cave still lurked an S-Class Eva. The students, now re-energized and no longer crippled by the enemy elements, would have to work together to bring it down. The moment Ida finished speaking, a wave of resolve swept through the group. Fear still lingered, but it had transformed, no longer paralyzing, now sharpening their focus. With determination etched into their features, the students surged forward, diving into the crystalline maze that awaited. Inside the cave, deep beneath layers of ice and frost, the S+ humanoid stirred, its piercing gaze fixed upon the approaching intruders. It had sensed them long before they arrived. Far from alarmed, it was pleased. This would not be a slaughter. This would be a performance. The humanoid grinned with inhuman anticipation, eager to face the invaders that had dared step into its domain. The hunt had begun. The cave's cold, dim interior pressed in on them like a living thing, silent except for the quickened footsteps and soft echoes of their movements. Senri's voice cut through the stillness, calm yet commanding, as she guided the team through the labyrinthine passages with her alpha ability. Every twist and turn was carefully mapped in her mind, and she directed Ida towards the exact location of the elusive humanoid Eva. Without hesitation, Ida moved swiftly alongside Orin, leaving the others to follow. Kuroboshi's gaze drifted across the frozen forms of Evas, suspended in the icy grip of Orin's ice star. He marveled at the absolute control she wielded, questioning whether this chilling power was truly the limit of her strength. The eerie silence that cloaked the cave was broken only by the sudden alert from Senri, who pointed upwards. Dozens of A-class Evas hung ominously from the ceiling, ready to spring into attack. Without wasting a moment, Tada Yoshihito unleashed his alpha ability in a storm of destructive force, shattering several of the suspended threats before they could react. Momokawa Koishi added her petrification power, turning some of the Evas to stone midair. Tsukuda Ritsu's scythes sliced with deadly precision, carving through the enemies like a scythe through wheat. Mukumoto Hazel's explosive kicks sent shockwaves that toppled others, while Yomono Zen trapped foes in water prisons, immobilizing them completely. Iwadake Ken's rocky exterior crushed those caught off guard with devastating force. Kuroboshi watched with growing awe. Each strike from his comrades felled an A-class Eva effortlessly. Their power was overwhelming, and it left him wondering how he could ever measure up. The thought of storing star elements to fuel his own alpha ability filled him with uncertainty. Despite his desire, he had no idea how to harness that energy. Ida's voice rang out, issuing orders for the selected students to secure the remaining A-class Evas. He alone would advance with Orin toward the humanoid's last known position. While moving, Ida questioned the persistence of so many A-class Evas. He asked Orin if her ice star had truly wiped them all out. Orin confirmed that her freeze had obliterated the entire A-class contingent. Senri's celestial observation corroborated this. No A-class Evas should have survived. Ida's brow furrowed as a chilling thought crossed his mind. Perhaps the S-class mother Eva was still producing new A-class offspring, replenishing the nest's defenses. Suddenly, the cave shuddered violently. Kuroboshi's instincts screamed danger as he noticed the tremors. Senri swiftly scanned the area with her alpha ability, revealing the cause. The bedrock at the entrance had collapsed. They were trapped deep inside, sealed within the cave's icy maw. Before they could react, shards of ice exploded outward, as if the cave itself was breaking free. Orin's expression hardened. Her ice star, the fragile shield holding back the enemy elements, had been forcibly cancelled. A thick wave of malevolent energy surged through the nest, suffocating and hostile. Then, a looming figure emerged from the darkness. The humanoid Eva stepped forward, as if it had been waiting patiently for this moment. Its massive frame exuded a terrifying presence, sending waves of dread rippling through the students. The group recoiled instinctively, hearts pounding with the raw instinct to flee. They could not understand why the humanoid had chosen to appear at the cave's sealed entrance. Orin quickly explained the truth. The cave was a twisted maze. The humanoid had cleverly released the previously frozen A-class EVAs to draw their attention forward, leading the students into a trap. Meanwhile, it had circled through an alternate passage and sealed the entrance, cutting off any escape. The cruel intelligence behind this maneuver revealed itself fully, shaking everyone with the depth of the creature's cunning. Tada's fury flared like a wildfire, and he charged at the humanoid with reckless courage, determined to prove that humans were not to be underestimated. His alpha ability, however, faltered and failed to manifest. The humanoid's brutal retaliation sent him crashing to the ground. The students' shouts for him went unheard, swallowed by the suffocating presence of the enemy elements now flooding the nest. Ida's voice rose above the panic, commanding calm. The element stones distributed before entering the cave still allowed them to access their alpha abilities for a limited time. The students hastily formed a defensive circle, preparing to face the inevitable attack. Curiously, the humanoid did not strike immediately. Ida speculated that it was exercising caution, studying its prey before committing to battle. The path they now faced was different from what he had originally planned, a route demanding a tremendous expenditure of star elements, one he had hoped to avoid. Kuroboshi suddenly stepped forward with unexpected resolve, his hand stretched out, palm open, as he concentrated on his unique ability. A powerful force began to draw in the hostile enemy elements that had saturated the area. The dark energy pulsed and shrank, retreating under his influence. The effect was immediate and astonishing. The oppressive presence that had once strangled their powers began to dissipate. Freed from the enemy element's grip, the students found their alpha abilities flowing back into them as if a dam had broken. Ida wasted no time. He ordered the A-rankers and below to form a protective formation around Kuroboshi, shielding him from the renewed threat of the Avas while he and Orin prepared to make their assault. The air thrummed with tension and the metallic taste of impending battle. With synchronized determination, Ida and Orin charged forward, ready to face the humanoid head-on. The two S-rankers charged headlong toward the humanoid, the air thick with tension and raw determination. The creature, towering and unnervingly calm, seemed almost amused, confident that these two brave souls were rushing straight to their doom. Orin moved first, summoning her alpha ability with precision and speed. A massive absolute ice wall surged from her hands, crashing down at the humanoid's feet like a glacier descending on a mountain. Despite the icy onslaught, the creature barely flinched, its enormous frame absorbing the blow as if it were nothing more than a mere annoyance. Ida wasted no time. Propelled by a surge of adrenaline and steel resolve, he leapt forward with grace and lethal intent. His alpha ability manifested in a razor-sharp, invisible blade, an air slash, a technique honed to perfection. The blade's edge carved through the humanoid's flesh and armor with surgical precision, slicing its body into fragmented pieces. The cave echoed with the sound of shattering flesh and cracking bones, yet the humanoid's form did not crumble. Ida paused, standing tall amid the swirling remnants of the attack, striking a dramatic pose that resonated with the fire burning inside him. His unwavering belief was clear: humanity, when united, could overcome even the monstrous strength of an S+ Eva. Kuroboshi watched with admiration, recognizing the brilliance of Ida's air slash technique. The compressed air blade was a marvel, capable of cutting through anything with ease. Still, Ida's stern warning echoed in the minds of all. Victory was not assured. The humanoid, despite its fragmented state, was still an S+ class Eva. Unpredictability lurked in every move it might make. Ida attempted another strike, aiming to finish what he had begun, but the humanoid's body responded with a force so powerful it hurled him backward into the cave wall. Pain exploded through Ida's body as the ground rushed up to meet him. Slowly, the fragmented pieces of the creature began to reattach, sinew knitting back together, flesh fusing as if no harm had been done. The terrifying regeneration sent a cold wave of dread through the team. Orin's breath caught as the humanoid's voice, deep, menacing, and unsettling, echoed through the cave, declaring a simple truth: hunger. The creature was far from done. Senri's voice cut through the chaos, commanding the students to form a defensive formation. Despite their efforts, Kuroboshi suddenly collapsed, clutching his hand in agonizing pain. He screamed, the sound raw and desperate. Senri's quick eyes caught the unnatural color of his hand, now tinged with a sickly hue. She took hold of it gently, suspicion growing that Kuroboshi had absorbed far too many enemy elements, an act that could have catastrophic consequences. Meanwhile, the humanoid rampaged through the nest like a predator on a hunt. Yomina was the first to fall, overwhelmed and swallowed by the beast's relentless assault. Tsukuda was next. His scythe, normally a weapon of deadly grace, swung with desperate fury. He attempted to unleash his alpha ability, but his efforts faltered. The enemy elements sealed his power, rendering even the element stones useless. The humanoid swooped down like a shadow, claiming Tsukuda with brutal efficiency, mocking the young warrior for not holding his stones tightly enough. The students' powers had been sealed, their advantages stripped away by the humanoid's overwhelming presence. Yet, just as despair began to settle, Orin unleashed a torrent of ice. Thousands of razor-sharp pillars rained down upon the creature, piercing its body in a sudden, stunning strike. The humanoid writhed in pain, momentarily staggered by the icy onslaught. Orin's voice cut through the fray with a grim command: retreat. The mission to subdue the humanoid had been aborted. With steely resolve, she vowed to use her command over the elements to distract the beast, buying precious time for the others to escape. However, the odds were stacked higher than ever. The humanoid, undeterred by the assault, called forth its remaining army with a sinister smile, its eyes gleaming with cruel anticipation. The ice that had frozen the nest melted away rapidly, and the cavern filled with the rumbling approach of countless avas. The students found themselves surrounded, the walls closing in, with no visible escape. The humanoid settled into its position as the apex predator, ready to enjoy its feast. Panic crept into their hearts as the reality of their situation sank in. Kuroboshi clutched his injured hand, pain radiating through his entire body, a heavy weight of guilt settling in his chest. The others braced themselves, but the swarm of avas descended like a wave of destruction. The attacks were brutal and unrelenting, tearing through defenses with merciless precision. Suddenly, an ava crashed directly in front of Kuroboshi and Senri, poised to strike with lethal intent. At that moment, the world seemed to fall away. Kuroboshi's vision darkened, and he felt himself plummeting into a vast, black void. The familiar sounds of the cave, the screams, the chaos, all faded into silence. When he awoke, Kuroboshi found himself suspended in a strange realm that resembled the boundless void of space. Stars flickered dimly in the distance as he floated weightlessly, surrounded by an endless darkness. In the distance, a faint glow caught his eye, a shimmering bubble cradling the strongest species. The sight stirred something deep within him, a memory like a half-remembered dream, tugging at the edges of his mind. The strongest species, encased in its protective orb, spoke without words, but with undeniable clarity. The prophecy he had heard, before now, came rushing back. The time had come sooner than anyone expected. A surge of both dread and hope washed over Kuroboshi, fueling a determination that burned brighter than ever. Kuroboshi faced a dilemma unlike any he had encountered before. The strongest species, a being of immense power long sealed within him, reached out with an ancient will. It demanded control of his body, promising to annihilate the relentless evas that surrounded them. The offer was straightforward: surrender and watch the enemy fall with ease. Yet, Kuroboshi hesitated. Pride, fear, and the instinct to protect his friends held him back. Instead of yielding completely, he bargained. He pleaded for the power to be lent to him, as it had been in the past, rather than a total takeover. Survival depended on this fragile balance. Both he and the strongest species stood to lose everything if they failed. Curiously, the strongest species sensed Kuroboshi's limited grasp of the situation. From its vantage, taking control was a no-brainer. Its regenerative abilities meant attacks would scarcely slow it down. The creature's body was practically immortal. Moreover, the humanoid Eva continued to threaten Kuroboshi's friends, placing everyone in immediate peril. The strongest species grew impatient and grave. It insisted that Kuroboshi was now the one responsible for all those he cared about. Refusing to allow it full control would doom them all. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Kuroboshi conceded, but on strict terms. The strongest species could take over, but only to destroy the humanoid Eva. Any harm directed at his comrades would result in immediate revocation of that power. The fragile truce was established with the promise from the strongest species, a solemn vow to respect his conditions. Back in the cave, chaos reached its peak. An Eva lunged at Kuroboshi, claws outstretched for the kill. Without hesitation, Kuroboshi seized the monstrous limb with his bare hands. A brilliant blue glow flared from his eyes, a stark sign that the strongest species had merged with his body. The strength behind that grip was overwhelming, and with a powerful heave, Kuroboshi slammed the Eva into the rocky floor, shattering it effortlessly. Orin's eyes widened as she witnessed the transformation. The blue aura encasing Kuroboshi radiated with a raw, untamed energy. The strongest species had fully taken control. What had been restrained for so long now surged freely, and the battlefield trembled in anticipation. The strongest species wasted no time testing its regained freedom. Once shackled by Kuroboshi's limits, it now erupted into a whirlwind of destruction. Fists hammered into Avas with devastating force. Powerful kicks shattered bones and armor alike. Each blow was delivered with precision and ferocity, a perfect storm of combat prowess and unleashed fury. Reaction times became lightning fast as the Avas swarmed relentlessly. Rather than falter, the strongest species embraced the chaos. It accelerated toward the oncoming masses with blistering speed, a blur of unstoppable power. One by one, Avas were crushed beneath its unyielding assault. Each victory was a testament to its indomitable will, a celebration of the freedom found in this new form. Inside, Kuroboshi's consciousness struggled to withstand the raw energy pulsing through his body. The voice of the strongest species echoed incessantly, urging destruction, urging dominance. It was a constant, relentless command to obliterate everything in its path. Kuroboshi wrestled with this inner conflict, a battle between his own humanity and the ancient, unrestrained force sharing his flesh. Meanwhile, the power once sealed away in the strongest species now poured fully into its soul, swelling with uncontrollable intensity. A sudden warning flashed before Kuroboshi's eyes, a window indicating a dangerous rise in the release rate of the strongest species. The indicator climbed rapidly. If it passed the 1% threshold, the strongest species would fully awaken and break free of any lingering restraints. Meanwhile, the scene inside the cave continued to unfold with brutal clarity. The strongest species reveled in its newfound might, tearing through the Ivas with disdain. Their attacks barely left a scratch. The creatures that had once posed such a terrifying threat now seemed pitiful, nothing more than distractions from the real challenge. Amidst the carnage, the humanoid Eva finally caught the strongest species' attention. Its imposing figure commanded a sudden shift in the atmosphere. The battle-hardened warrior regarded the humanoid with a mixture of amusement and hunger for a worthy fight. Kuroboshi's soul churned in turmoil deep within his own body. The strongest species, once sealed away as a dormant power, was stirring with alarming urgency. The orb imprisoning it had begun to crack, fissures spiderwebbing across its surface like a warning. The presence inside whispered, if Kuroboshi could bear to hold just a little more of its immense power, it might keep from bursting forth prematurely. The threat lingered palpably. The slightest lapse could unleash chaos beyond control. Realization dawned sharply on Kuroboshi. This was the strongest species designed from the start. A slow, deliberate rise in power meant to overwhelm his defenses and take over completely. The stakes could not be higher. In this desperate moment, Kuroboshi resolved to wrest control of his body back, no matter the cost. A familiar hole appeared in his vision. A portal he had used before to reclaim his form from the grip of the strongest species. He sprinted toward it with all his might, hope fueling his every step. Suddenly, an invisible barrier halted him mid-stride. No matter how fiercely he pushed, no matter how much he strained, the wall held firm. Then a stark warning flashed before his eyes. The release rate of the strongest species had surged too high. The space inside his body was insufficient to allow Kuroboshi to reclaim control. He was trapped, caught in a battle within himself where the odds had suddenly turned bleak. Meanwhile, the tension inside the cave surged to a fever pitch. The strongest species faced off against the humanoid Eva, a foe that recognized its counterpart despite the unlikely setting. The humanoid had transformed, upgrading its form into something larger, more menacing. Its eyes glinted with savage intent, promising to devour the strongest species and absorb its power to become unstoppable. As the humanoid began to consume star elements to fuel its monstrous growth, the surviving students watched in muted dread. Memories of the humanoid's true capabilities washed over them, confirming the terrifying reality. Senri's sharp mind pieced together the truth. The humanoid had concealed its growth ability all along. It was a predator far beyond human strength, an enemy no one should dare to face in battle. The strongest species, stung by the arrogance of the humanoid's claim, leapt down from the pile of defeated Ava corpses beneath its feet. Its movements were fierce and fluid, embodying raw, unrestrained power. Before landing, the humanoid lunged with deadly speed. Their fists collided with a titanic force, sending shockwaves rippling through the entire cave. The earth trembled, and dust rained down, as they exchanged blow after devastating blow. Amidst the chaos, the strongest species appeared to be reveling in the fight. Every punch and grapple was a dance of destruction, their ferocity chipping away at the cave's walls and floor. The students watched in awe and growing fear. The cave's integrity was failing under the relentless barrage, threatening to collapse and bury them all. Connie's thoughts raced as he tried to understand the source of this newfound power. He recalled Kuroboshi's unique ability, the absorption and release of star elements. However, the warrior before them now was nothing like the Kuroboshi who had fought during the infamous Boar Eva incident. This was a different beast altogether, shaped by the overwhelming influence of the strongest species. Senri's voice cut through the mounting panic with a clear command. Escape was imperative. She urged Orin to use her power to clear the massive rocks blocking their only way out. Orin approached the debris, her hands weaving the familiar patterns of her ice control. Yet, as stones began to loosen and shift, fresh boulders tumbled from above, sealing the path once more. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the shadows behind them. The strongest species had turned to face the students, his aura crackling with menace. He declared they were not allowed to leave. They were his audience now, bound to witness the spectacle of destruction he was about to unleash. Every word dripped with malice and cruel intent. Sensing an opening, the humanoid lunged to strike while the strongest species was distracted. The attack was swift and deadly, designed to catch the glowing warrior off guard. However, the strongest species moved with uncanny precision, blocking the assault with a single, effortless motion. He then retaliated, sending the humanoid hurtling through the cave with brutal accuracy. The echo of the humanoid's crash against the cavern walls faded into silence. The strongest species turned his blazing gaze back to the students, his expression twisted with cruelty and satisfaction. His voice promised a slow, torturous end for them all, with a particular venom reserved for Kuroboshi. Kuroboshi's voice echoed through the cavern, filled with desperation and anger, as he confronted the strongest species now controlling his body. The promise made earlier not to harm his comrades weighed heavily on him, and he demanded it be honored. The strongest species, however, laughed off such notions, mocking Kuroboshi for believing a being so powerful would ever make a genuine promise to a mere human. In its contempt, it compared humans to ants, insignificant creatures unlikely to keep their own promises. Frustration and helplessness gnawed at Kuroboshi as he darted toward the familiar portal, the hole he had previously used in his struggle to regain control. Once again, the invisible barrier stood firm, stopping him cold. Desperate attempts to use the mysterious window to reclaim his body failed repeatedly. The strongest species taunted him mercilessly, branding him weak and useless, a human incapable of wielding his own powers properly. Meanwhile, in the open cave, the strongest species flexed its newfound dominance. It promised a cruel fate for the surviving students, declaring that they would become mere toys in its merciless hands, objects for endless torment and amusement. Among them, Connie's heart screamed in disbelief and sorrow. He shouted at the strongest species, pleading for understanding, for the person he once knew to resurface. The response was cutting and cold. The strongest species dismissed any association with Kuroboshi, calling him a useless brat, unworthy of respect. The cruel revelation hit Connie like a punch. The entity controlling Kuroboshi's body was none other than the same monstrous force that had attacked their school before, a terrifying enemy they had thought defeated. Intent on leaving nothing but ashes, the strongest species raised its power to incinerate everything in the cave, aiming to erase all traces of its foes. Just at the moment when destruction seemed inevitable, Orin acted swiftly and decisively. An icy storm erupted around her, freezing the strongest species in place with a web of frost and glistening ice shards. She seized the moment to order the students to evacuate immediately, vowing to hold the line herself. Connie urged her to flee with them, but Orion's eyes held an unshakable resolve. A solemn vow had been made, to stop Kuroboshi before any more harm could befall anyone. The ice spell she had cast would not last much longer, and every second counted. Gathering all her remaining strength, she summoned 1,000 towering ice pillars, shattering the rocks that blocked their escape route. The path to freedom was clear at last. Senri took charge, rallying the students and pulling them away from the danger. She implored them not to let Orin's courage and sacrifice be in vain. As the group hurried out, relief and dread mingled in the air. Freedom came at a price, and Orion remained behind to face the monstrous force alone. With a roar that shattered the frozen prison, the strongest species broke free from the ice and strode toward Orion with terrifying confidence. It declared its intention to burn the entire planet to ashes someday, but for now, its focus was on the determined warrior before it. The strongest species promised exquisite torment, especially for Orion, because of her importance to Kuroboshi. It craved the suffering that would ripple through Kuroboshi's soul, eager to watch his agony from afar. Orin's resolve crystallized like the ice around her. She summoned every star element she could muster, preparing to stand against the invincible foe, even if it meant sacrificing her own life. The strongest species smiled with wicked anticipation, confident that this confrontation would be entertaining, a cruel game worthy of its power. Beneath the surface, Kuroboshi's internal struggle escalated as the release rate of the strongest species surged to a critical 0.9%. If it surpassed the threshold of 1%, the physical body of the strongest species would be unleashed, an event that could spell doom for humanity. The mysterious window flashed a countdown. 59 seconds remained before the inevitable release. Panic flared within Kuroboshi's soul, realizing the extinction of his kind might hinge on the outcome of this internal battle. In the midst of chaos, an unexpected choice appeared, a new option that could alter everything. Apex Predator Reversal Mode. The choice demanded acceptance or rejection. This option offered immense power, but at a terrible cost. Activating it would consume Kuroboshi's body entirely, erasing his abilities forever, effectively ending the human he was. The seconds slipped away relentlessly, leaving Kuroboshi with only 55 precious moments to decide his fate. Farther into the cavern, Orin's battle raged on with brutal intensity. She wielded her Ice Star ability, a technique that could unleash wide-ranging assaults by conjuring 1,000 icy pillars. Desperation pushed Orin to seek a concentrated breakthrough. However, a nagging doubt plagued her. She wasn't confident enough in her precision or skill to land a decisive strike. Her gaze locked on the strongest species, who watched her with a sinister smile that twisted like a devil's grin. That smile reminded her sharply of Kuroboshi, the man who had once saved her, carrying her on his back when all seemed lost. His steadfast words echoed in her mind, reigniting a flicker of hope and resolve. With renewed determination, Orin gathered the shimmering star elements that filled the air around her. Slowly, she channeled and compressed them into a single, blazing point of concentrated energy. The strongest species immediately recognized her technique, his admiration laced with amusement. He mirrored her move, coalescing his own power into a massive orb of raw energy, challenging her to clash their forces head-on. The prospect of direct confrontation flashed before Orin, but her instincts warned her of the devastating consequences. Colliding with such pure energy would likely obliterate her entirely. Instead of accepting the bait, she opted for a more tactical approach, striking swiftly and precisely without directly engaging his concentrated attack. The dilemma now was to create an opening through which she could land her blow. Suddenly, a battered figure burst forth from the fractured wall that had once crushed him. Ida emerged, bloodied and grimacing, wounds marring his face, but his spirit undeterred. Realization dawned on him as he saw Kuroboshi controlled by the strongest species. Fueled by a mix of fury and loyalty, Ida launched himself at Kuroboshi with his alpha ability blazing. His air slash, a blade formed from highly compressed air that could cut through nearly anything. The strongest species welcomed Ida's assault, arms wide as if embracing the incoming attack, wearing a grin that spoke of confidence and amusement. Just then, the humanoid entity appeared as well, eyes gleaming with desperate hunger. It lunged at the strongest species from behind, seeking to devour him and gain greater power. The strongest species anticipated the humanoid's move, blocking the attack with brutal efficiency and delivering a crushing counterstrike that sent the creature reeling. However, this fierce exchange left a crack in his defenses, an opening that Ida wasted no time exploiting. In a swift, savage motion, Ida slashed through Kuroboshi's arm clean off, severing it with a precision born of desperation. Orin seized the moment with fierce resolve, despite the gnawing fear that surged in her chest. Her thoughts flickered to Kuroboshi, knowing that defeating the strongest species could come at the cost of his life. Still, the weight of the moment demanded action. With unwavering determination, she lunged forward, piercing the strongest species' body with Pluto's star, a tightly concentrated spike of star elements that struck true and clean. Pain ripped through the strongest species, gasping as the energy within his severed hand began to swell and writhe with unnatural force. Ida's sharp mind quickly grasped the danger. The expanding energy threatened to destabilize the entire cavern, possibly triggering a catastrophic collapse. To their shock, the earlier attack that should have been fatal to the strongest species was only partially successful. Orin's strike had come just a heartbeat too late, allowing the being to survive and recover. With the terrifying fluidity, the strongest species reattached the grotesque hand, its flesh now monstrous and distorted, pulsing with dark energy. The cave trembled as Kuroboshi's body began an unsettling transformation, morphing into the physical form of the strongest species itself. Kuroboshi stood at the crossroads of an impossible decision, his mind torn between two grim fates. The apex predator reversal mode promised salvation, yet it demanded the ultimate sacrifice, his own body. Images of his mother flickered through his mind, the warmth of her smile, her enduring strength, the lessons she had imparted when times were darkest. His thoughts drifted to Orin, locked in a desperate battle against the strongest species, her icy resolve unyielding despite the overwhelming odds. Time was slipping away, each second closer to the catastrophic release of the strongest species' true power. Hesitation meant death, not just for him, but for all who depended on his strength. A distant memory surfaced, his mother's words, spoken softly, but with unshakable conviction. They echoed in his heart, a beacon of courage amidst the chaos. With a newfound resolve and a faint smile breaking through the tension, Kuroboshi made his choice. He would do what he could, no matter the cost. Summoning every fragment of his will, he granted permission for the apex predator reversal mode to be activated, setting in motion a chain of events that would redefine the battle. Deep within the cavern, The strongest species was fighting a different struggle, a race to reclaim its full physical form. Large, imposing wings had already erupted from its back, dark and majestic, a terrifying symbol of the power it wielded. Despite this, the transformation was incomplete. The remnants of ice embedded within its body acted like shackles, holding it back from reaching its true potential. Frustration twisted its monstrous features as it cursed the lingering frost. The strongest species' voice thundered through the chamber, echoing with fury and dark promise. No force could stop it, not while even the slightest spark of life remained. Its sights were set on the S-Rankers, those powerful warriors who had stood in its way. With the sinister promise to spare them the agony of suffering, it vowed to eliminate them swiftly. Raising a colossal arm, it summoned a blinding surge of star energy, a storm of raw power poised to strike down both Orin and Ida. Despite the overwhelming threat, both Orin and Ida stood their ground. Their faces were etched with a grim acceptance. There was little they could do to halt the strongest species in its current form. Yet, the moment was shattered, as a dark, ominous hole suddenly appeared on Kuroboshi's body. The strongest species recoiled in shock, eyes wide with disbelief. More holes began to rip through the body's surface, spreading rapidly across different parts. A primal scream tore from the strongest species' throat, a raw expression of agony and frustration. It quickly realized the source of this devastation. The apex predator function was fighting back, carving away at its form from within. Orin and Ida watched in confusion, unable to grasp the full meaning of the spectacle unfolding before them. Ida wasted no time. Scooping Orin onto his shoulder, he made the decision to retreat, knowing that survival was their only chance. They sprinted toward the cave's exit, the chaos behind them threatening to swallow everything whole. At one point, they slowed, and Orin gently asked to continue the escape on her own 2 feet. Ida nodded in respect, understanding the warrior's resolve. Together, they dashed out of the cave, their breaths heavy, but determination unbroken. As they fled, Orin's mind lingered on Kuroboshi, the man struggling beneath the surface. A silent vow took root within her, a promise to stop him before the strongest species could consume him completely. The battle was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. Back inside the cave, the strongest species fought desperately against the destructive black holes gnawing at its form. It refused to yield, snarling that it would not lose to what it considered mere human ability. Regeneration followed destruction in a brutal cycle. The black holes tore into its body, consuming flesh and energy, but the strongest species answered by rapidly healing each wound. A fierce contest unfolded, each side draining star elements in a ruthless back and forth, like a twisted tug-of-war between annihilation and survival. The strongest species growled with defiance, declaring the battle its own. It believed the match was tipping in its favor this time, confident that Kuroboshi's power alone would not be enough to surpass it. Within the shadows of this chaos, Kuroboshi's soul bore the marks of the fight, filled with holes, battered, and worn by the relentless war inside him. A sharp, agonizing pain spread through the strongest species' outer body, the black hole eating away at his form relentlessly. The sensation was foreign and unbearable. He could only imagine that Kuroboshi must be suffering the same torment from within. Despite the searing pain, Kuroboshi remained unfazed. His mind was focused on a singular purpose: preventing Earth's destruction. The relentless agony was a small price to pay for protecting everyone he cared about. It seemed that, just when things reached their darkest, the apex predator ability surfaced at the most critical moments, offering a glimmer of hope. The strongest species sneered through the torment, questioning the nature of this mysterious power. Kuroboshi had no answer for him. It was something even he barely understood. For now, both of them faced an uncertain fate, locked in a struggle that felt like the end for both predator and prey. A grim confession escaped the strongest species. Never before had he experienced pain. His immense power had made him virtually invincible. Nothing in existence had ever been capable of inflicting such suffering. Now, Pierced by the spreading black holes, pain became his new reality, one he loathed and feared. The strongest species' voice cracked with disbelief and bitterness. He considered the endurance of humans, creatures so frail and seemingly powerless, who had suffered pain for so long without giving up. It was a revelation that shook his arrogance. Kuroboshi's spirit burned brighter in response. Pain was nothing compared to the will to protect those he loved. In a battle of resolve, he knew he would never falter. The harsh physical torment paled against the fire in his heart. The strongest species regarded him with a new kind of respect, mixed with contempt. This human, so insignificant in appearance, was proving to be quite remarkable. It was a grudging admission that came far too late. Kuroboshi couldn't help but laugh bitterly, mocking his foe for realizing the truth, only when it was almost too late. The black holes, like ravenous voids, tore deeper into their souls. They spread, consumed, and battered until the apex predator reversal mode finally reached its conclusion. The intense struggle within came to an uneasy silence. Outside, the students sensed the impending doom as the cave began to tremble violently. Dust and debris rained down as the cavern threatened to collapse. Connie's heart pounded with worry for Orin, hoping she would escape the chaos unharmed. Then, as if pulled from a surreal dream, Orin and Ida burst from the cave's mouth, sprinting towards safety. Their faces were streaked with grime and fatigue, but their spirits remained fierce. Connie's urgency filled the air as he sought news of Kuroboshi, but Mukumoto's sharp retort cut through the tension. She spoke harsh truths. Kuroboshi was the strongest species, an Eva, a being that had once tried to annihilate them all for sport. The accusations hung heavy in the air. Despite the fearsome reputation, Connie refused to accept this dark image of Kuroboshi. He defended the man who had encouraged him during his weakest moments, fought alongside him, and inspired hope. No matter what others believed, Connie trusted his own experience. There was no way Kuroboshi could be an Eva. Orin's explanation brought clarity amidst the confusion. Kuroboshi was both human and the strongest species, a terrifying fusion hidden from all but herself and Senri. His unique black hole ability had absorbed and sealed the strongest species that appeared at their school, a desperate act to protect everyone. Unfortunately, the immense power was too volatile, and in the heat of the moment, Kuroboshi had miscalculated. The release of the strongest species was unintentional, but inevitable. Ida's frustration simmered beneath his composed exterior. Kuroboshi had tried to carry the burden alone, attempting to act cool in the face of overwhelming danger. Now, they had failed to stop the strongest species, forced into a retreat that felt more like a bitter defeat. The question of reinforcements loomed large. Iwatake's news offered a flicker of hope. A small unit of S-rankers, led by the principal, was en route to the battlefield. Senri's calm voice tempered the urgency, revealing that her celestial observation ability had already assessed the situation. She confirmed that both Kuroboshi and the strongest species had been eliminated. This revelation cast a heavy shadow over the group. The weight of loss settled deep, and Connie's resolve crumbled into tears, the pain of impending loss washing over him. Ida's reprimand was sharp and unyielding. Weakness had no place among the Hachi students, the defenders of humanity. Fear and despair could not be allowed to fester. They had to train harder, grow stronger, and rise to a level capable of defeating even the most formidable enemies. His words sparked a fire within the group, uniting them in a battle cry that echoed through the ranks. Their voices rose in fierce agreement, a promise to honor their fallen comrade through strength. Orin, however, was cloaked in sorrow. Memories of Kuroboshi haunted her thoughts, the warmth of his smile, the vibrant energy he radiated. Despite the grim news, she refused to let go. Hope remained her constant companion, a silent prayer that Kuroboshi's spirit endured somewhere beyond their sight. She vowed to fight for his return, to stand against the darkness that threatened to claim him forever. Meanwhile, far from the battlefield, within the academy's walls, a solitary figure sat in a wheelchair, gazing out a window streaked with the fading light of dusk. The student's eyes reflected disbelief and sorrow. The disappearance of the boy known as the strongest species had shaken the foundation of their world. Questions hung in the air, but answers remained elusive. A full year had passed since Kuroboshi vanished without a trace, but peace remained elusive. District 85 erupted into chaos as an Eva invasion tore through the quiet streets. Commanders issued urgent orders. All C-rankers and above were to engage the invading Avas in combat, while D-tankers and below were instructed to evacuate to safety. The district transformed into a battlefield, and tension hung thick in the air. Amidst the turmoil, a man gripped his daughter tightly, pressed against the crumbling walls of a residential block. The sudden appearance of an Eva in such a place baffled him. His heart hammered as he tried to make sense of the nightmare unfolding before them. His daughter trembled, eyes wide with terror, but he steadied his voice with a promise to protect her, even though he was only an E-ranker, far below the ranks of those who could truly make a difference. Their fate seemed uncertain, yet his resolve did not waver. The monstrous Eva loomed over them, its grotesque form blocking out the dimming light. Just as it lunged, ready to strike, a sudden intervention shattered the moment. An arrow carved from shimmering ice flew through the air and struck the Eva square in the chest. The creature convulsed, then froze solid, suspended in a crystalline prison. The man looked up, eyes blinking in disbelief, to see Orin stepping forward from the shadows. She offered a brief apology for her delay, though her expression remained focused and unyielding. Recognition dawned in the man's eyes. She was an S-ranker, ranked third among all humanity, a warrior of formidable skill. The daughter's gratitude was quiet, but genuine. Orin wasted no time, urging them to move quickly to the rear where safety had been secured. Her promise was clear. The invading Avas in the area would not go unchecked. Her squad was already mobilizing, prepared to confront the threat head-on. No sooner had she spoken than more Avas burst from the earth itself, their grotesque forms twisting from fissures and cracks. Orin's team sprang into action without hesitation. Connie led the charge, his alpha ability igniting the battlefield. His signature move, the black bubble bullet, hurtled toward one of the monstrous invaders. As an A-ranker and ranked 21st among humanity, Connie had grown remarkably since their last encounter. His strike pierced the Ava's defenses, a sharp testament to his progress. Next came Mukumoto, whose explosive strike tore through the enemy ranks. The blast scattered one Eva into shards of debris and smoke. Also an A-ranker, and ranked 23rd, Mukumoto's ferocity and precision bolstered the squad's momentum. Orin encouraged her team to keep the pressure on, pushing forward with relentless determination. The battle raged fiercely but swiftly. In what felt like a flash, the invading Avas were defeated. Orin contacted squad headquarters, her voice calm yet commanding. She confirmed the suppression of the invasion, noting no further star element activity detected in the district. The order came to return to base, their mission complete. Relieved yet exhausted, Connie finally allowed himself to admit the fear that had gripped him during the fight. Mukumoto acknowledged his growth, pointing out that it was no small feat to restrain an S-rank Eva with a single strike. Connie credited the hard training he'd endured under Ida's tutelage since the brutal humanoid battle. His happiness was palpable. He valued the collective strength they had gained. The frustration of feeling powerless before would never take hold again. Kuroboshi's name arose naturally in their conversation. Orin shared her enduring belief that he would one day return unexpectedly. Hope clung stubbornly to her heart, a beacon in the darkness. Together, the team set about transforming the neutralized Evas into elemental stones, a resource crucial to their ongoing war effort. Mukumoto entertained the idea of blasting the stones with another explosion, but Connie quickly advised caution, warning she might catch the team in the blast. The light-hearted argument was a brief respite, as Orin's gaze drifted upward. Her mind wandered, trapped in memories and the weight of responsibility. Since the emergence of the strongest species, Eva activity has surged dramatically. Humanity had no choice but to fight back with everything they had. The rigorous and unyielding training administered by S-tankers across the Hachi school had sharpened the alpha abilities of the students drastically. Advances in technology had also played a crucial role. The Stella's Type 1 star equipment, crafted from elemental stones, allowed for unprecedented detection of enemy elements and star activity. This combination of human willpower and innovation enabled the deployment of large-scale military operations. Slowly but surely, humanity's counter-offensive began to take shape. Despite the apparent gains, a prophecy loomed darkly over their heads. 5 of the strongest species were predicted to arrive within the year. Orin's thoughts turned heavy with doubt. Did they possess the strength needed to face such overwhelming foes? Suddenly, an emergency message flashed across her screen. It was from S-Ranker Saki, addressed to all S-Rankers. The news was unexpectedly good. The operation to liberate District 1 from Ava occupation had succeeded ahead of schedule. The joint S-Ranker team had eradicated the threat half a day earlier than anticipated, allowing reconstruction efforts to commence sooner than hoped. Settlers could return to the city in peace, a remarkable achievement considering it was guarded by 5 of the most powerful S-Rankers alive. The names of these warriors carried weight and reassurance. Tsuin Teruyo, ranked 5th among humanity, Gozaki Jin, 6th, Soka Ritsu, 4th, Yada Akira, 8th, and Saiki Yuzen, 2nd. Together, they formed an elite force, the best defense humanity had ever seen. Yet beneath the surface of this victory, Orin could not shake a creeping unease. A year after the legendary hero Kuroboshi Gui was presumed dead after sacrificing himself to stop the strongest species, he makes a shocking reappearance at a memorial event held in his honor. His return begins with an emotional reunion with his former comrade, Hyuga Orin, who is overjoyed to see him alive. However, the tender moment is quickly overshadowed by the arrival of the other S-Rank students. While some are happy to see him, suspicion immediately clouds the reunion. The situation escalates dramatically with the appearance of a small, dragon creature that only Guy and Orin seem to see at first. The tension explodes when Kani recognizes the creature in horror, identifying it as the soul of the strongest species, now inexplicably given a physical form. Instantly, Gui's former allies turn on him. Believing he has returned with the very entity that devastated them, the S-Rankers, led by their top student Ida Rasen, surround him. Ida seizes Gui and threatens to kill him on the spot, unless he explains himself. Under duress, a bewildered Kuroboshi Gui reveals an unbelievable story. He is shocked to learn a year has passed, claiming that from his perspective, he only regained consciousness 3 days ago. He has amnesia regarding the past year and woke up in the same cave where he disappeared, with the creature collapsed beside him. He bluntly admits he has no idea how or why he is alive. Unconvinced by this incredible account, Akira declares that Gui's story is too suspicious to be trusted, and she will kill him to eliminate the strongest species. Gui reacts to the threat laughingly, and challenges her to try killing him. Kuroboshi snapped back to reality, his eyes clearing as he realized how reckless his words had been. He immediately apologized for speaking so boldly, knowing full well why the others would be suspicious. He wasn't offended by their distrust. After all, in a world riddled with deception and power plays, suspicion was a natural reflex. Despite their doubts, he insisted that he was only human, and to prove it, he raised his palm for all to see. The ominous black hole that had once marred his hand, the dark abyss that sealed away the strongest species, had vanished. That terrifying ability was gone, leaving him stripped of power and reduced to a mere man without any extraordinary skills. He also mentioned the small creature everyone feared might be the strongest species. Though it once held immense danger, it was no longer a threat. When Ida demanded a reason, some kind of proof behind such a claim, Kuroboshi admitted he had none. Instead, he relied on a deep certainty, an unshakable feeling that told him the danger had passed. Yada, however, refused to accept any of it. Her distrust burned too fiercely. She wasted no time, channeling her alpha ability and launching a strike at Kuroboshi. The tension in the room surged. Yada's voice rang out, a harsh reminder that they were about to face 5 special species and couldn't afford to harbor a snake in their midst. Her skills were unmatched, known for her agility and deadly electric abilities, making her a formidable foe, even among the elite S-tankers. Kuroboshi tried to reason with her, pleading for calm and understanding, but Yada was unmoved. She lunged again, with a ferocity born of distrust, aiming to end him before he could prove himself. Kuroboshi dodged her attack with a quick step to the side, narrowly avoiding the crackling surge of electricity that followed her strike. Orin, watching the scene unfold, barked out a warning, telling Kuroboshi to run before Yada's relentless assault overwhelmed him. Kozaki's eyes narrowed as he observed Kuroboshi's evasive movements. It defied belief that a mere human could dodge Yada's attacks. Among the S-tankers, Yada was not only the fastest, but also the most skilled user of electric abilities. Her agility and precision were legendary. No one moved as swiftly as she did. Unknown to everyone else, Kuroboshi's body had begun to move on its own. When Yada struck again, he saw her motion lag behind, slowed inexplicably. The attack, which should have been lightning fast, came at a pace that gave him enough time to evade with ease. Tsuen's astonishment was clear as she witnessed Kuroboshi's flawless dodges. The lightning-fast strikes that should have overwhelmed him merely brushed past, leaving no trace. Yada refused to relent. She continued to unleash a barrage of electric attacks, each one charged with deadly intent. Despite her relentless assault, Kuroboshi moved with uncanny smoothness, slipping through each strike with the grace of a predator. Orin's brow furrowed in confusion, struggling to understand how a powerless human could evade attacks from the fastest S-tanker. Only the strongest species, the ancient, hidden force within Kuroboshi, knew the truth of what was unfolding. Yada's struggle escalated, frustration building with every failed attack. Her movements became increasingly desperate, but then Kuroboshi's demeanor shifted. A fierce resolve sparked within him, and with a sudden burst of speed, he caught Yada's wrist mid-strike. Holding her close, their faces inches apart, a strange silence fell over the room. Suddenly, Yada's mind was invaded by a powerful vision. The image of the strongest species in its true physical form flashed through her thoughts, shattering her focus. Pain struck her like a thunderclap, forcing her to collapse to the ground, clutching her head. Kuroboshi, now back to his human state, watched her fall with concern and confusion. He couldn't understand what had just overwhelmed her. In the quiet aftermath, the strongest species revealed a shocking truth to Kuroboshi. Their souls had intertwined. Fragments of each other's essence now resided within their bodies. This fusion meant that Kuroboshi was no longer just human. In essence, he had become the strongest species too. The revelation hit him like a tidal wave, a scream tearing from deep within, as the weight of his new reality sank in. The S-rankers surrounded Kuroboshi, their faces a mix of suspicion and resolve. Their intention was clear, to restrain him. Their claim echoed through the tense air. Kuroboshi was the strongest species, a danger that could not be ignored. Suddenly, a voice broke through the heated exchange, commanding them to stop. The interruption was met with impatience. Saki, one of the most impatient among them, waved off the interjection as if it were a mere annoyance. However, recognition flickered in his eyes as he looked upon the newcomer. Her presence was familiar. It was Unagi Banri, the renowned Foreseer whose reputation preceded her. The atmosphere shifted as her calm authority settled over the group. Banri's arrival was no coincidence. She urged the group to cease their conflict immediately. Kuroboshi, confused, asked about her identity. Senri, standing nearby, clarified that Banri was Kuroboshi's twin sister. The revelation stunned him. He had no idea he had a sister, let alone a twin. This newfound connection was as unexpected as it was profound. Senri explained that while she could see the present clearly, Banri possessed the rare gift of seeing the future. Ever since Banri foresaw the emergence of the first strongest species, the twins had been revered and treated as the nation's most vital assets. Their unique abilities were considered a beacon of hope in a world plagued by uncertainty and catastrophe. Banri confessed that her foresight was imperfect, fragmentary at best. She had not foreseen the arrival of the second strongest species, the one that had consumed Kuroboshi. Her visions of the impending arrival of the 5 strongest species remained vague, clouded by the chaos of the future. Yet, she had recently experienced a new vision, one featuring a figure resembling Kuroboshi, locked in combat with the strongest species. The Foreseer explained that the twin sisters' powers often merged, allowing them to glimpse a fuller picture when their abilities combined. She understood the group's apprehension about Kuroboshi being labeled as the strongest species, but she insisted that he was no ordinary being. Kuroboshi was a unique fusion, part strongest species and part human. This dual nature, Banri believed, made him the pivotal figure in the looming battle against the strongest species. Curiosity stirred within Kuroboshi. He asked Banri to explain what the strongest species actually were, and how they differed from other Evas. Banri took a moment before elaborating. She described the human ranking system used to classify Evas by strength. Each ranker could defeat Evas of their own rank or lower, but the S+ class was on an entirely different level. These Evas were so powerful that multiple S-tankers often had to combine forces just to stand a chance against one. The strongest species, however, were an entirely separate threat. Their power far surpassed any known rank or ability. Even if all S-tankers and high-ranking tankers joined forces, they might still fall short. Banri recounted the devastating attack by the first strongest species a decade ago, which nearly annihilated the elite fighters. All but one S-ranker, Principal Nishiki, had either died or retired after suffering severe injuries. The battle claimed over 100 A-tankers, and below, severely crippling humanity's defensive capabilities. The sheer scale of destruction demonstrated how a single strongest species could push humanity to the edge of extinction. Kuroboshi's existence as a hybrid, both human and strongest species, was their only hope. This unique fusion could alter the course of the war, standing as a key to survival where others had failed. The tense discussion was abruptly interrupted by a piercing alarm. The S-rankers instinctively reached for their weapons, anticipating the imminent arrival of their deadly foes. The time to face the strongest species might have come at last. Far to the east, about 50 kilometers from the Hachi school, chaos erupted in District 132. An ominous attack descended from the sky, turning the city into a battleground. The district defense squad, led by Captain Yoshino Susumu, scrambled to identify the threat. The possibility of an EVA attack loomed heavily over their heads. Yoshino's communication device suddenly buzzed with a special alert. Star elements classified as S+ or higher had been detected, their intensity surpassing the system's measurement limits. A directive blared through the comms. All A-rankers must evacuate immediately. In the heart of the city, a colossal red dragon materialized, its monstrous presence signaling the arrival of yet another strongest species. Before Yoshino could react, the beast lunged and devoured him whole. Panic erupted as his subordinates fled the scene, desperate to escape the carnage. While retreating, an eerie sound echoed from behind them. The dragon unleashed a brilliant red beam of light that shot skyward, followed by the sudden descent of a human figure who landed with unsettling grace atop the creature's head. The figure was none other than Captain Yoshino himself, though transformed. His body had been taken over by the strongest species, granting him an unnatural ability to speak the human tongue. A chilling new personality emerged within him, a predator reveling in his newfound power on a strange planet. His first actions were merciless. Without hesitation, he swooped down and struck down one of his former comrades. With cruel intent, Yoshino declared his plan to seek out the other missing strongest species. His ambition was boundless. He aimed not only to devour them, but also to hunt the native species populating this world. He envisioned himself as the king of the universe, the ultimate force transcending all boundaries.